Public comment is a time when citizens can address the commission. You have 3 minutes. We need name and address. I'm going to open public comment. Does anybody wish to address the commission at this time? At the side, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Brum, and I live at 404 East Magnetic. I would like to ask that the following matters be addressed during new business item 3, which is on public works and utilities. In reading the budget, I understand that a rather large rate increase for stormwater, water, and sewer are being proposed for the next year's budget. I believe this is based on a utility rate consultant study. I was unable to find that document in the agenda or the paperwork, and I'd like to know if that ever was made public, or if so, where could I look to see that? And secondly, I would like to understand why such a hefty increase in 1 year as opposed to other years. And the third, I just want to give you some feedback from a senior citizen who I happen to live with. When I showed her the proposed rate increase for water, she said, I don't care if I'm 91 years old or not, I'm not paying that much for water. We'll go to the lake and bathe there. And I say that not out of hysteria or laughter. I just want you to know that the water increase has caught the attention of people on fixed incomes. So I can't see the clock very well, but I think I'm done right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to address the commission at this time?
Hi there. Colleen Roberts, 903 Adams Street, Marquette. Is it possible to reserve time during the discussion of the Public Works utilities, or would you like my questions now?
Either or, whatever you wish.
I would like to reserve time at that moment for new business number 3.
Number 3, okay.
Okay.
Anyone else wish to address the commission? Anyone? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close this portion of public comment. We move to the consent agenda, which we have in front of us. Would someone care to make a motion to accept the consent agenda? Motion? Commissioner Smith.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second? Commissioner Stonehouse?
Second the motion.
Seeing no comments, all those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? That carries 6-0. Next, we come to new business. 2 items. The first item, community development engineering, planning, zoning, and road safety. City Clerk, do you have information, or do we go straight to the discussion? Straight to the discussion. City Manager, who do you want to start with? Gary?
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is the 3rd of 4 scheduled sessions. And from the last session, there were a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to provide answers for. There were a couple of questions for John Swinson, one of which was regarding, I think it was ball field wages. It was, why were we budgeting $32,000 when only $24,000 is being spent in the current year, or projected to be spent? And his answer is, for the FY18 season was delayed because of the April snowstorm, so we brought staff on a little later. We initially had a lighter than normal crew due to 2 of the staff's NMU hockey schedule. FY19, we anticipate needing the usual $32,000. The next one was why were pavilion hours not on page 110? That was the fact sheet, and he just said they are on page 111, along with the alcohol permits sold. It is estimated to be a record 525 hours for FY18. And there was a third question regarding the beautification committee about the promo fund dollars, and he said he will follow up more with that later. It's a pretty detailed answer that he didn't have time to get into at the moment, but he'll be providing more info on that later. So with that, we're ready to get into the meat of the presentation, and we'll start out with community development with Dennis.
Thanks, Gary. Mayor and Commissioners, good afternoon. I am here this afternoon to present the budgets for the Community Development Department. And as I get started into this, I'd like to just talk for a minute about community development to get a better grasp on what we do, because it often seems confusing. You're always seeing my face on just about every issue that comes across the City Commission from time to time. But in essence, the Community Development Department is the department that facilitates and garners community input. Depending on what the issue or topic may be, it could be akin to herding cats. We've said that in the past, but essentially we try to bring people together in planning efforts to negotiate a compromise and move the city forward in a very sound manner from a planning and development standpoint. We take ideas that come from the community. We mold those ideas into legal form, and then we design them, build them, inspect them, and then monitor their performance over time. This can deal with anything from assisting with the parks to most of our transportation assets, and overseeing the long-range economic development planning for the city as well. I really would like to thank the staff in my department. You know, I do this every year, and they're generally the people that take money from folks in the community and then sometimes have to work with them to make things work. So sometimes they take money and say no, and they catch a lot of heat. And as I said previously, our department is pretty much involved in a lot of the land use making decisions in the community. And as you well know from your side of the dais, that those sometimes aren't pleasant, and we share in the misery from time to time. And I really would like to thank my staff, because they're behind the scenes trying to do good things for the city. And I really appreciate their efforts. It often goes unseen, but we do try to bring you the best recommendations we can. The first division of community development that I'm going to speak to this afternoon is our engineering department. And I believe that starts on page 100. And essentially, the engineering department has a multiple role for the city of Marquette. Within the community development department, they, like I said, take ideas, design them, oversee the construction, and then inspect them later on. They also work with a number of folks in public works to engineer solutions. So they kind of act as a providing support to the Public Works Department and the rest of the city, as well as they're the caretakers of our geographic information system. They're the caretakers of all our infrastructure records and so on and so forth. And they're the folks that go out and continually inspect and work on our capital improvements plan, which, although is a responsibility of the government as a whole, our city engineer, Keith Whittington, is our capital improvements administrator. And he's the one that really is responsible for bringing that all together in terms of factual, actual data-based or data-driven recommendations for the community on replacement of infrastructure. Our engineering department does bring in some revenue. Last year, it was a little bit shy of $900,000. Most of that comes from some of our fixed charges. We do see minimal income from permits and things like that, but generally it comes from our fixed charges. As far as the department itself, our authorized positions in there, we consider myself as a portion of that, but then we have 7 people underneath that that work for the city engineer, including an assistant city engineer, and then a number of staff level engineers and technicians that we have and inspectors on these projects. All of these folks wear multiple hats. Our city engineer is definitely a working manager, and all of the folks also, in the wintertime, they design things, help with other departments, and then in the summertime, they're also out inspecting on every project. So as you guys and gals go from project to project, the city staff person on there is usually one of our staff engineers or technicians. As you can see in our program statistics, we had quite a bump up in numbers on 2017, and I think we will all remember that 2017, the time that the city of Marquette had every single street torn up. We had roundabout construction, and we had a number of funded projects where we were able to utilize some brownfield dollars and other things to advance a lot of things within the community. For 2018, that sees us come back a little bit more on what I would consider average to above average year. We're working on 5,000 linear feet of streets, and the overlay amount is pretty significant if you look at that, because that relates directly to our SIMP program, our street heavy maintenance improvements. That's where we take a street that may be borderline as far as being able to save, and then we can overlay it and extend that life of that street much, much longer and save dollars for the community while doing that as well. Projected for looking to our fee schedule, we have very minor increases in the fee schedule, and what we are essentially looking at here is a 3% increase across the board, which we had would be standard upon direction from the administration on that. There are no other significant increases in fee other than that 3%, including no new fees as well. For our requested revenue in the upcoming year, as you may know, we have met with the administration, and we are not proposing anything above and beyond what would be expected of a normal year to meet the minimum requirements for the engineering department. Particularly of note, we've cut our professional and contractual in half for the next year. Usually we use that money for as needed projects, so it's not something that is extremely gonna make a real difference to us. We can do a lot of things in-house, and we often do, but other than that, there really isn't much in here that isn't expressively needed. For example, the 775 account does reflect our recalibration of our survey and GPS equipment, and of course that's done on a timely schedule, and it needs to be done in order to keep that equipment accurate. So before I move on to planning and zoning, are there any questions related to the engineering, revenues, expenditures?
Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. I have a question on 717 health insurance. You may not be able to answer, but the fiscal year budget of 18 was 177,000, and year-end estimate is about 60,000 more than that. And then the budget is 182. So I don't know what happened and what we expect to go back down.
I can't
That's a
answer
big-
that.
It's a big variance, I guess, is my.
Yeah.
That's just a calculation by HR, and it is very much dependent on somebody's marital status and if they have a family. So if you have staff changing in and out, which Dennis has had, then that's going to
Okay.
impact how it's calculated.
And as well, we did bring on a new hire halfway through the year. It was for a vacant position.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no questions there, I will move on to page 104. This is our planning division of community development, often referred to as the socialist arm of the community, right? Because all planners are generally known as communists. I'm just lightening it up. That's an inside joke.
Are you?
Are you really?
Is Mike that hard? Yeah.
You know, a small side story, when I first started for the city of Marquette, I think Norm Gruber had got me a coffee cup that said Communist Planner on it. So, I mean, it's a long going, you know, anybody in the community definitely thinks that about planning. But in essence, planning is not that. Planning is really taking ideas and trying to get people to agree to a common outcome of those ideas for the long range benefits of the community. And we deal with land use transportation. Dave oversees the maintenance, the community master plan. They liaise with the planning commission. Dave also serves as a zoning administrator, liaison to the planning commission, and many other groups. And this is actually a city charter mandated function and as well as state law. Generally, most of the revenue that we bring in is directly related to permits. We brought in about $62,000 last year. Most of that was on the permit fee side of things. Very minimal amount of $3,000 related to civil infractions, which would be our code enforcement activity that would be directly related to something under the planning aspect. But we have a city planner and zoning administrator, and we have an administrative assistant that we put her down quarter time here, but she is essentially the community development administrative assistant. And then I share time with this department as well. We seem to be running standard on the planning commission meetings. We're up quite a bit in address assignments, of course, with all the development we've had. And we deal quite a bit with what would be license applications and things in the right-of-ways and along those lines. Part of this division also shares activity with zoning, which is found on page 105. And the zoning division is responsible for review of all the proposals that are compliance with the zoning ordinance, which is based upon the city master plan. Dave acts as the zoning administrator there. We also have a planning zoning technician, which was formerly known as the code enforcement official. And then we have Andrea, our zoning official. All those folks do a wonderful job. That you want to talk about being in the middle of the sausage making machine, that's it right there. That is the meat grinder. And they do a great job. Our zoning compliance permits, as you can see all across the board, we are pretty much up on a lot of those, and it's a busy town. There's a lot of development going on, and things are moving forward. Within our fee schedule, we have most of our increases are 3% across the board. There are a few exceptions in here, and I will note that on page 106, we've come up with a plan for a municipal property use permit versus a municipal property use license. And this is dealing with some of the encroachments that you would see on a sidewalk. For instance, somebody may need a temporary ADA ramp. They get injured, need to have an ADA ramp that might span a certain portion of the sidewalk. It would be temporary. We'd like to work a policy into before the city commission in the upcoming months that would permit staff to go ahead and be the approvers on that for a simple permit fee, and that reduces the time where people have to come to the city commission for something that could only be there for maybe 45, 60 days or whatnot. And then we're breaking out the cost of an actual use license, which would be something more permanent. Say a business downtown needs a concrete ramp that's going to be on the sidewalk in perpetuity. There would be an increased cost for that one. So those are essentially two new fees that we're looking at. The rest of the fees on this page are directly in line with what we've done before with a 3% increase. The next page are fees for...
Or just maybe for further information for everybody involved. Why do you do the 3% increase? What standard?
2%. It was 2%. Yeah, but what was the?
Well, the increases are normally based on staff increases or what we consider to be inflation. In other words, if it costs 2% more
Yeah.
per year per employee, then we try to pass on that same.
It's directly related to the cost of the service.
And that's my point. That's what I want
Yeah.
people to understand, is that the reason that there's an increase there is because you guys have this down scientifically to a standard that says this is how long it takes our staff to take care of this issue. And it really does a nice job of clarifying why the increase. And
That's
something that I very much appreciate.
That's correct, and actually I do appreciate that because it made me think about something that I didn't mention in my portion of the presentation, but as I get into this next set of fees, some of them seem to be pretty high, $2,000 for a plan unit development or site plan review. And those are directly related to the cost because of the zoning code that we have in place, the zoning ordinance and the review process. You have 4 or 5 departments looking at those and the cost of routing that. It's all a direct cost. Of course, we're not permitted by law to charge anything more than actually what it costs, so.
Thanks.
I was moving on to page 107, which is the fees that are related to zoning or the Board of Zoning Appeals. Again, with all of these, what we see is the modest increase until we get down to site plan review. And we've actually, we're preparing to put a couple of items in here that will be forthcoming in the Land Development Code. And one of them is the opportunity to have a very reduced sketch plan as opposed to a full-blown site plan review. And then we also have the option in there for a preliminary site plan review, which would allow somebody to take that plan forward, get some comments. And then we also have the ability for a reduced fee for an administrative review that wouldn't require the whole team to look at it. Right now, if you have a minor change, it has to, by policy, it has to go out to the whole team of 5 people or whatever. Well, we're trying to work in some discretion where, if a simple amendment comes in, we'll just have one person look at it, make a decision, and move on, so we're not wasting time on that. And that will wrap up those fees. As far as our expenditures for planning and zoning, they're shared under the 721 account. The significant note to look at here, which may seem a little high, is professional and contractual. And I did want to make a note on that, is we plan on proceeding with web-based code consulting. And essentially what that means is as we hopefully adopt the new land development code, we would like to go above and beyond what the city uses now, which is Municode. We've found a company called Encode Plus. They specifically do zoning ordinance. They do zoning ordinances that line up with our geographic information system, and it will be set up so a resident can go online, click on their piece of property on the map, and it will directly link them to everything they need to know about their property on where they need to go in the zoning ordinance, and it's all hyperlinked. So if you click on your property and it says, I want to build a fence, you click on the thing that says, I want to build a fence, and it'll have the permit for you and tell you what you need to do to build the fence. For the cost of that, I think we were quoted around $15,000, $15,500, something like that, to get that up and running, because there's a lot of scanning involved with that. We've determined and recommend that is a very high priority for the community. Quite often we have people come in that if they were able to have that information available to them, it would save them a great amount of time and frustration. We're just not set up to do that now. And Municode doesn't really offer that, even though it offers a digital version of the code. I think that's more for a legal interpretation than it would be actually something that's useful that Again, maps, click, Windows-based. It generally works a lot better. But again, other than that, we are really operating at what I would consider to be the minimum amount available. So with that, are there any questions on the planning and zoning? Okay, so that brings me to our road safety fund. And this road safety fund,
Page 155.
at 155, this is the money that we take in from Lundin through the agreement that we have with them. And we take the revenues, and that we do the annual safety updates for the Lundin trucking corridor. If you'll recall, a lot of this, a lot of what we had requested on here has to do with the project that we've done on Wright Street. And most of it, I believe, is bond payoff. Correct. Yeah. There's not much more to add to this one. We get the money from Lundin per the contract, and we turn around and pay off the bond that we issued to do the Wright Street improvements. And the last one I have is page 202. It's stormwater utility. However, I'm just going to take you through the easy part of it. I'm going to leave the heavy lifting for Kurt and Gary later on. And that really has to do with our involvement in stormwater. In the community development department, we have a hydrology engineer. He's considered our water guy, so we tie him to the stormwater utility. But most of the community development involvement in stormwater utility comes through our capital improvements plan, more particularly dealing with the expenditures found in the 555-459-972 account, which is the first section under stormwater utility fund expenses. In that capital outlay land improvement account, we have at the bottom of the page, we've broken out the projects that are funded by that, which would include the upcoming year be 3rd Street reconstruction, a portion of Fisher to Baraga, K Avenue reconstruction, Front Street, 3 different areas that are proposed, Altamont Street, Marquette Drive, Lakeview Drive, Park Street, and the curbing replacement. There's also unanticipated drainage improvements and rehab citywide. That's $75,000. We often coordinate with the Public Works Department on that kind of money. For instance, there may be an issue that comes up when we have another one of these 500-year storms that something fails. In that case, if it's related to a project that we're working on, we could use that money and pay the contractor. Otherwise, Public Works could use that account for some of their maintenance activities. As well, in the professional and contractual, we have about $32,000 of that devoted to annual wetland mitigation costs and annual maintenance by the USGS, the Geological Service. That has to do directly related to the DLP project. We have a stream monitor that was installed downstream of the project before the Altamont Street Bridge to monitor the levels of the stream and rain events. The good news is we haven't really had to respond to any floods there, but the not so good news is that thing goes off just about every time it rains. So, but we do work through it, and all seems to be going well. So that's really our only involvement in the stormwater account. So I guess I would leave the rest later for the other group. So in a nutshell, I actually kept it under 45 minutes for you this year. I hope you enjoyed it. Have any questions?
Just noticing that you've got, and maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not, but the unanticipated drainage improvements for DPW and unanticipated drainage improvements and rehab citywide. Are those two different 75,000s?
Yeah.
And just curious as to the differences, you know, talking about once every so many years storms, is that a normal application for you to have $150,000 worth sitting in there?
I can,
Yes.
let me answer that. In addition, I mean, in the last couple of years, we run into some problems with having money set aside for unexpected things. Many related to the stormwater situation. In other words, I could use an example that we added some catch basins down here on Fifth Street as part of that Fifth Street project because of the water problems we were having in relation to some of the private residents. So we didn't have that budgeted, and to have that kind of money available in case we need it has proven to be valuable. It doesn't mean we're going to spend it if we have it. It just means that if we need it, it's there. And it's happened more than once. I mean, there's been, in my time here, which is going on 3 years, there's been half a dozen different instances where we've had to make last minute changes to, or upgrades to certain areas.
That's the truth, and that money does often get used. It's no secret that, you know, we've had the tour of our infrastructure and we're doing the best we can to keep up with it, but often in instances it does fail. So, if there are no questions, I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We do have one question for you.
Oh, I thought it was you, Pete. I'm sorry. So are we gonna get into this a little more? Or can I ask someone else these questions? I just wanna make sure that I've got some questions and make sure we have time for that.
It'll be presented more fully later.
And
My
what-
oversight, I realized just before we were starting that Dennis did have a part in the stormwater, so I didn't get that in the schedule, but it will be deeper dive into that.
Okay, and we'll go back to these pages and we can ask questions. Thank you. I just wanna make sure we have the opportunity. Thank you.
So next part, we'll start Public Works and Utilities, and that's divided up between Kurt, Derek, and Scott. I'll just ask that we go straight in order, and between those three, they will step up and speak to what we. We'll start with Pete.
Hey, Gary. Colleen Roberts wanted to speak to this first. I think this would be the time.
Well, I have a few questions. Do I have to, Colleen Roberts, 903 Adams Street, Marquette. Number one, comparing apples and oranges, we now have new meters. It changed from cubic feet to gallons. How is this going to impact our monthly bill? And then these increases we're talking about, a residential customer with 4,000 gallons of monthly use would have a bill of a total for the month of $99.57 per month, an increase of $16.78 per month. Now, most of our citizens here are on fixed incomes or are young families. So I would like to know the rationale for such a large increase at this one particular time, rather than evened out over several years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kurt, are you going to be able to answer that later, or are you going to, you'll get to it? Okay. And Margaret Brum also had some, where's Margaret? You had questions. Did you want to restate them, or are we going to? I'll go up here. Just state them again, and again, maybe Kurt can address those later too.
Margaret Brum, 404 East Magnetic. I read through the documentation last night, and it seemed that the increases in stormwater, water, and sewer were based on the result of a consultancy study that analyzed these rates. I looked through all the documents and I couldn't find a reference or a cross-reference to that consultancy study. And I was wondering if that document was available or would be available to the public. But if it wasn't available, if someone who had read it could sum up who was hired, what did they look at, and how did they come to these numbers? Because the numbers are kind of all over the place in terms of its big increase, but each fund gets a different level of increase. It's not like it's 10% across the board. And that would go a lot towards understanding why this next year so much more is being asked. I worked out it's about $240 per household, and that's a lot of more money for utilities. That was my question. Thank you for the extra time.
Thank you. Kurt, you'll take care of that, right? Okay, so we're moving on.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I need to repeat what I said. I was just informed my mic wasn't on when I when I said what I did, so people on TV couldn't hear. But we're going to start the Public Works and Utilities portion of the budget. We'll start on page 70, and these three areas are the department heads to cover. These are Kurt, Eric, and Scott. And we'll just go in the order that we have listed, and as we get to those areas, we just need a department head to step up and address it. So thank you, and we're ready to start on page 70 with Eric.
All right, good afternoon. My portion of the public works covers the facilities and maintenance, and that's where we're going to start off with City Hall and Cemetery. The other two will be Scott Conbenzi, who handles the public works side, which is the streets, and then the sewer collection and water distribution. And then Kurt Goodman will be covering the utility side. To start off on page 70, City Hall, on the fact sheet, we used to have, there are no authorized positions in this building. We used to have a janitor. We've been contracting it out very successfully, and have realized some cost savings doing so. Looking down at the program statistics, electrical maintenance and plumbing and some things have fallen off. Now we're starting to see some of those Johnson Controls improvements come through. I only anticipate that's going to be a little bit better as we move into next year to see a reduction in what we're doing. It'll be mainly PMs instead of our emergency repairs that we tend to do. Going over to the budget side on page 71, a lot of what you see is really status quo. We did have a slight reduction in what we were trying to plan for next year in regards to, we want to do some sidewalk improvements, some repairs to the east side of the building. We're just getting a little ugly over there from years of plowing and that nature, and we did cut that out to as part of the budget cuts, but everything else is pretty well status quo regarding our normal operation, normal maintenance. And I'm sure the question's going to come up as to how do we handle Johnson Controls moving forward regarding all the savings that we're generating. And right now, Gary and I are working through that to figure out how that's going to play out. We budgeted accordingly, like we didn't do anything, so that we know that the money's budgeted, because we know what we save is what actually pays for the JCI project. So that way we're not going to shortfall ourselves, and it's going to be a rather large accounting endeavor to make that work. And I don't know if, Gary, if you want to add anything.
Emphasis on very large accounting endeavors.
Yeah. So, any questions on City Hall?
Just a question. I'm on page 71, looking at contractual and professional. What's the intended purpose of that?
So that includes our janitorial services. That includes services that you do with our HVAC, things we can't do,
That's what that
garbage
falls under.
service.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anything else? All right, moving on to cemetery, page 77. So we do employ a full-time sexton who's also our arborist as well. He handles, he's a double duty kind of guy, and we have 4 seasonal employees there at any given time to handle all the grounds maintenance as part of the authorized positions there. Looking at the program statistics, burials are actually down a little bit for this year compared to last year. We're about, looking at 10%, but our space sales are on par with where we've been. Moving over to the fee schedule on the next page, on page 78, we're not recommending any changes as far as the fee schedule goes this year. Marquette, the city, is already priced at the higher end of cemeteries in the area, and we're going gonna hit that point where we might price ourselves out. You know, we cover our costs the best we can. But, you know, when you really look at what Park Cemetery is, it's a park as much as it is a cemetery. You know, it's really part of our park system. You know, granted, there are burials there, but really a lot of people enjoy that as a park. They walk it, they spend a lot of time there, so it's a very popular place for citizens to visit. Any questions on fee schedule? Moving on to page 79 with expenditures. This one really is really flat, and the Park Cemetery historically has been a relatively flat operation budget. You know, things change here and there a little bit regarding capital expenditures when we've done columbariums, or this year we're actually doing some road improvements. So there's actually a reduction when you look at compared to last year, but you know, besides the little bit of change you get from, you know, whether it be a MERS increase or property insurance increase, or maybe a little bit on the utility side, our operations are pretty tight and on the lean side. Any questions on cemetery? Moving on to the next one, which DPW, page 94. I'll hand it over to Scott and kind of tag team this one together.
As Eric said, page 94, just the department fact sheet. We have had minor changes to this, but really this has been status quo as far as the bread and butter of what Public Works has been maintaining for quite a few years now. So there's not really a lot of changes to discuss here. If you look at page 95, it just goes over some of the programs with the park maintenance, forestry program. And then on page 96, we hit the fee schedule. And when we go through and calculate these fees, we actually try to take a typical situation and apply our current labor and material rates and all that in calculating up a cost for all these fees. So we haven't proposed any changes for these fees this year, with the exception of the garbage fee or the solid waste fee, which is located at the top of page 96. And those increases really are two things. They do reflect a contractual cost with our solid waste hauler. And then the second thing they reflect is we have had a lot of increase in the volume over the last few years coming in for our rubbish drop-off site. And we have actually, as you were aware, increased the number of hours that we're open so that we can maintain our daily limit of the 200 cubic yards. As far as the actual expenditures on page 97, the only one notable change in there is the operating supplies 740 line item. It has several small projects, and if you look at the bottom there, those 4 projects are listed along with the dollar amount. Any questions on the general Public Works Fund? Good. Just flipping the page over to sidewalks. This really has 2 components as you look through the expenditure portion of it. There is a capital portion of it that's generally managed by the engineering department. And when the sidewalks are reconstructed for construction projects, that's included under the capital outlay portion. And in addition to that, there is a portion that's simply a sidewalk replacement contract that we do every year. And that's the the larger number under the capital improvement. The rest of the budget is simply plowing the sidewalks, any minor repairs that we make. That's where the rest of that goes. And really, it's been status quo for a while now. Go to major streets on page 125. Not a lot of change here. I will point out that if you notice, we've started to mark down paint again. We are doing traffic markings in-house at the intersections again. And we've continued to contract out the long line painting. Some of the changes you'll see as we move along here are under the routine maintenance budget. And this past year, we had money set aside for purchase of a new painting machine and contracting some of that out. It was a lump sum. Now, as we move on to the next year, the overall dollar amount isn't going to change a lot, but the way it's allocated is, because with us doing part of that work in-house now, we'll have extra supplies for the paint and extra hours towards that, so.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Commissioner.
Question, Scott. When we talk about painting our streets, which looks to me, they look great. Just want, I think, people to know, aren't we using the most long-lasting paint that we can buy?
There's a few different varieties that you can use that they're about a 3-year product.
Okay.
We chose MMA, and I'm not going to try to tell you what that stands for. I don't have my chemistry degree in my back pocket here, but if you want to think of it as simply an epoxy that's a cold application instead of a warm application, that's really the only difference. But it is a very durable product. It takes a little bit more care and effort in planning when you're putting it down. You've got about 5 minutes before the mixed product hardens, as opposed to regular dry paint where you probably had half hour to an hour.
But once it's down.
Once it's down, it's pretty good stuff. Had the opportunity to see some of the product that had been down for a couple of years when I was in Minnesota, and I mean that's kind of a similar climate to what we have here, so it's been a durable product for them.
Yeah, I think it was a great move. It was a great idea by the department and the city manager to do that for a lot of different reasons. A lot of those have been explained, but just in case some people who may be watching may not understand what we're doing, but we are taking on that project ourselves. And part of the reason why is because it was essentially a monopoly on top of that. I think that should be mentioned as well.
Yeah, the cost for contracting the service out in its entirety continued to go up. The reason we've kept the long line painting as a contract is because that's been pretty steady and it's been a pretty fair price. And the equipment would be much more expensive for us to get back into that end of things. So you're right. It is a big change. It's a product, like I said, that should last 3 years. Our goal is to kind of work through the higher traffic areas the best we can. This year, we've still got 3rd Street, Lakeshore Boulevard. Those are kind of our next areas to hit. And then we'll be moving back to 4th Street and Fair, and that's probably about as far as we're going to get this year. But the overall goal for the program, being that it's a 3-year product, is we'll try to, best we can, get through all of it in 2 years, and then on a yearly basis, it'll just be maintenance of where it needs to be touched up. And that way we won't, we'll be able to get through all we need to get through on a yearly basis.
Do you have more equipment to buy, or are you do you have everything you need at this point?
At this
Or
point,
line painting?
we've purchased the machine. There is a additional piece that we're looking at, that's basically to propel the painting machine. This machine is about twice as heavy as the old machine, and it's a little bit harder working the machine on the hills than what we had expected. So I know Eric's looking into what the cost of that would be. And then, you have a vehicle too that you were.
That's already gone through, yeah.
Yeah, so they're basically moving over a vehicle to dedicate to that painting.
Good, thank you.
Really, as far as the major street goes, the only things that change from year to year, if you skip all the way past what I had mentioned for the routine maintenance down to the bottom, you'll see that all the construction projects that the engineering department does are all broken out for you, their portion of it there at the bottom. And then you'll notice the 25,000 that's still set aside for the contracted portion, the long line portion, which we'll do annually. And then there's a few other projects that are listed there that are actually out-of-house projects that we contract out for.
It's got just an interesting number here. You removed 38,000 cubic yards of snow last year. Used 900 tons of salt and 2,000 tons of sand. I'm reading your stats here. Major street winter maintenance. Excuse me, cubic yards of sand used.
As I say, it sounded high, but
2,000 cubic yards, but 900 tons of salt.
Yep.
I say that only with interest. A lot of snow.
We
Thank you.
try when we're going through to, we've been trying to hit the downtown a little bit more often, really to get out there to, where you have a lot of on-street parking and that, to hit those areas. And then the other major points of emphasis on that are sidewalk routes where it builds up quicker and that. And when we've got a few narrow areas on streets and that, we try to hit those as well.
Your Honor. Yes. We don't get a lot of compliments, the city commission or you guys, but I'm sure you heard, but I think it should be mentioned that you got a lot of compliments about this year, this winter. There were several meetings where we had people come up with the public comment and talk about how well your guys did. So it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to hear.
It's very good to hear. It's one of those tricky ones of when do you start? As you know, we can go basically one storm, and you can go from not really needing it anywhere to the whole town needs it all at once. So
And everybody wants it at the same time.
everybody wants it at the same time. Yes. If we move to 203, which is our local streets, not a lot of changes there to report either. It's been fairly status quo. Again, if you skip all the way to the bottom, you've got the engineering projects listed out. And then a couple of
Mr. Mayor?
Dennis got a question.
Jenna, yes.
I was just wondering which page we're on. I think everyone flipped to 203 when you said 203.
Oh,
Okay, we're
sorry.
so- I saw everyone flipping.
It's called 203.
Yeah,
It's
so
just the
I saw
following
everyone
page.
flipping, and we're not on the same page anymore.
Okay,
We got to
sorry.
get back on the same page. So we're still on, which was it? I'm sorry?
It's page 130.
Thank you.
It's 203, the local streets.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. down there at the bottom, you've got the breakouts for the construction projects for next year. And then you've got the street tree planting and dust control that we contract out. If we move to page 134, now we get to talk trash.
You've been waiting all year to say that, right?
As Dennis said, you got to keep it light a little bit. Some of the changes that you've seen over the last year have been that we have moved to a new site off of McClellan Avenue. We have changed the hours around a little bit, changed the days up to accommodate really what we've seen is a little bit less usage as far as leaf and brush drop off during the summer. And we've seen a increased need for the amount of time we spend open for the rubbish drop off. So that's a big part of the changes that you've seen. We are not turning piles any longer at the new site as far as the compost goes. All of that material is being taken out to the county landfill that has their own composting cell. So that's a fairly major change. As far as the curbside collections we do, you've seen the introduction of a cart system. Right now, we're probably only at about 15 or 20%, yet it's been interesting. People just kind of keep coming. It's slow, but they do keep trickling in that want use the cart system. We have had a few turn back in, but by far and away, the majority, I think, of the ones getting turned back in aren't people that wanted to discontinue the service. It's people that want to change the size of their carts. And we are happy with the program this far. It's still, I think, over the next year or so, you're going to continue to see a change. I think it was one of those things where it's kind of people kind of view it as a drastic change from what the status quo of the green bags was. But I do feel that people do like the program, and once they see that their neighbor has it and it's been going well, you're starting to see more and more people come in, and that's kind of a typical comment, I think.
Scott, question?
Yep.
In regards to the rubbish drop-off, you had the fiasco at the beginning of the year when you first opened up. Everybody's, rubbish piles up over the winter, and obviously you couldn't handle it. There was problems, turning people away. Do you have a plan in place to alleviate that problem so it doesn't happen again next spring?
A lot of it's just the education of it, and getting the word out there that we can't take it all in at once. But in addition to that, one of the things that we do have planned to start out the year is we will have more nights available for a couple of weeks just to get started. I do agree with you. I think it was one of those where everybody kind of has their stuff over the winter, and as soon as the spring comes, they want to get out there and get rid of it. Some of them have a real need to get rid of it right away, and others probably wait a little bit. And I think now we're to the point where we are open the entire time. We're not maxing out anymore. And I think what people will start as they get used to the program, they'll just come gradually over the summer, as opposed to, we're still going to have a big rush at the beginning, no question about that. But I think that rush next year will probably be a little bit less than what it was this year.
So extra days for a while, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And and advertise it so that people are aware of it.
Yeah,
There are a lot of angry people that, you know.
we still put out the flyers on a regular basis in the spring and the fall for all our programming. And then, you know, we'll get the information out through the website and through the TV channels and that.
Good, good, thank you. Question?
Yeah, Scott, will we be able to, or do we have plans to enforce what we are allowing to come into the rubbish drop-off? From my observation being there, there's a lot of material that doesn't fit our description. And I would suggest that we also have commercial users that are using the drop-off.
I think there are probably some that have abused the site that are truly commercial.
There's a pile of them that are abusing it.
Yeah, and essentially, we are following the rules that we've created as far as who we're allowing in there by checking IDs and by checking their utility bills and that.
But we also established, I believe, within the program, what types of rubbish are acceptable.
Well, we still had acceptable construction waste for a pickup truck load, and I know that's
I see a pickup truck, I see
coming
a
in.
trailer, I see 12 or 13 mattresses stacked up, I see material that
been-
plainly doesn't fit within the
all
constraints.
the mattresses are allowable.
12?
How? So we're allowing now an apartment owner to change out his mattresses and dump them in our rubbish site. That's supposed to be
You've
taken to the
got-
county.
Well, you've got some people that are there with the utility bill and their driver's license to prove that they're residents.
That's right, but
And
the
you've
product doesn't fit the requirement.
Mattresses do.
15 of them?
It's,
I mean,
it's an obvious abuse.
It's an obvious abuse, and what I'm trying to say is that we need to have a mechanism in place that ensures that the citizens of Marquette that are paying for it are the ones that are using the facility and using it in the manner that has been accepted, which is non-commercial use. Right?
That is true. And I mean, we're looking for ways to improve the system, but it, without a doubt, is imperfect. As far as, you know, you're able to check driver's license, you're able to check utility bills. You know, if somebody comes in and they've got a commercial vehicle and that, you know, that's one thing, but it's difficult.
Well, we have to do the difficult. That's what I'm trying to say. Because something is difficult doesn't mean we can't do it and do it successfully. And I think from what we had last year and the very obvious nature of the abuse of the system, that we need to establish very specific rules and have somebody there willing to enforce those rules. My end of my comment.
I would agree. Paul?
I don't want to jam it down your throat because I know you guys are working on it already, but you came up with a lot of options when we talked about it earlier in the season when we had the issues with the people really bringing in way too much, whether it's a north, south, east, west, per week type drop-off option, come on in and get a tag, whatever it is. The people that live on Pioneer deserve to be able to drive out of their driveway when they want to leave and be able to get back in safely when they want to get back in. There's been a lot of outcry on social media, things along those lines. We've seen it. The tire drop-off is a very successful and awesome program. I love it. But man, that was it was carnage out there for those people that lived along the road. And there was a lot of kickback from just the traffic. So, you know, you try and do good things for people, and then they come back and slap you in the face for giving them $1 instead of $5. But it is what it is. I know you guys are going to come up with a better program or some sort of an approach that's going to make it run smoother. I really would hope that you guys would still consider some sort of a looping interior inside the site. I know it's a tight site. I know we don't have as much room as you want, but to get to keep those people on Pioneer from having to deal with parked cars for an hour and a half for a few times a month. So I know you'll figure it out, but it's been something that we as commissioners have heard a lot from our constituents, and I've heard a lot from people outside of Marquette asking me why they couldn't, why they got shut down and they couldn't get in. I said, my first one was, don't you live in Harvey? And they said, well, that's besides the point. And I said, it isn't. So, you know, so we need to be diligent in that respect as well. So I know you'll figure it out, but thanks.
Jenna?
Thank you. I have a question on 806 administrative charges. Wondering why that went up by about $6,000.
It's a calculated number based on citywide what's applied, so there's finance numbers that go into there. There's
Oh.
part of.
Thank you. I couldn't remember what that was, so that's why I was asking.
That's how we charge out the overhead administration from the general fund. So that takes into account payable, HR, the city manager, the city attorney, those services, and we spread those out.
I have one other question as well. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yep.
cut you off. I was just gonna tell you, as part of that though, we did increase with the amount of administrative time that we had been putting into the solid waste over the last year. I think we did increase it by 1% or 2%.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. My other question is, recently this year I switched to where I pay, it automatically comes out of my account for my own utility bill, which I know includes the trash fee. When I asked them if I could get a digital only copy instead of getting mailed a copy, they said that they didn't have that capability yet. So I'm wondering if we know when that will be coming, because I see $9,000 a year in printing and publishing, which I think is pretty high, when I think at least there's got to be a good percentage of people who would prefer not to get a paper mailing or the paper reminders that you're talking about, even if that's an email with the dates.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not directed at you, Scott.
No, but one of our best ways or most effective ways that we've found to get the word out is to go through the utility bill stuffers, just because it gets out to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Melissa's sitting in the back of the room here, and she could probably come up and tell you a lot of the phone calls she gets. You get anything and everything under the sun of, I don't get a newspaper, I don't have a TV, I don't have a computer, depending on the generation. So essentially what we try to do is hit as many different forms of media as we can to get the word out.
I guess I appreciate that. I just wish there was a way to opt out so that I could save the city money by not getting those monthly bills. And I know there are other people who feel the same way I do.
Come on, Gary.
I don't know.
No, I would like to pay my bill without having to incur
we opt out?
the
That's
cost
good,
the city
yeah.
has of the monthly bill, the paper version. Thank you.
Good.
283 road maintenance is on page 153. This one kind of speaks for itself as far as what it is. This is the money that's coming in from Eagle Mine as far as maintenance of the portion of the truck route coming through town. And right now it's $500,000 annually. One of the major projects that was at least partially funded by that was Wright Street last year when that got redone. Basically from Sugarloaf to Enterprise.
Is there another 200,000? Is there not another 200,000 that,
That's the
That's-
road safety.
that safety thing?
So there's actually two different pots of money we get from Lundin. One is road safety, and that's 200,000 per year, and that's overseen by Dennis's area. And then we have the road maintenance, which is 500,000 per year, and that's overseen by Scott's area.
so where does the 200,000 go?
Same thing. It's mostly used for debt service for the Wright Street project.
Not, I thought that was for information, safety information.
Some of it is, but we're using some of that for the debt service as well. So
And some of the additional safety items were, the area is pretty heavily signed. You've had the addition of bike lanes, so some of the extra traffic markings and that have been safety oriented.
So what's left goes to debt reduction, is what you said, okay. Question? Mike?
Just a statement. It's good to see in the budget. I've had explained to a couple of people over the last month or two that Lundin actually does pay for the use of the roads. They were complaining about the truck routes that we have through the city, and the statement to me was, well, they don't pay anything for it. I'm sorry, I beg to differ, but they do. I didn't realize it was as much as $500,000, so that's good to know too.
It's actually 700,000.
700,000, yeah. So that's a pretty fair amount of money. They're paying for the use of the roads.
And that payment won't be forever. The plan is, because there was a bond issue to do some work on Wright Street, once the payments end, what we're not spending now for those purposes, we'll reserve that and save that to pay the debt service until the bond is paid off.
So Gary, you mean, Lundin is going to continue to pay, but we won't need to spend that money on the roads?
I
Is that what you mean?
don't remember when the contract ends, but they won't keep paying these amounts forever. I don't have that in front of me, but there will be a time when they don't have to pay us that amount, but they will have paid a sufficient amount of money to cover maintenance and also cover the debt service for that.
And it's related to the possible damage that they may cause.
Correct, yes.
Yes.
Piggy, on that, would that potentially be extended if they extend the operation of the site?
Yeah, there's a possibility of extending it. There's also a possibility of shortening it. There are several different clauses in it. Like I said, I don't have that agreement in front of me, so I can't really speak to it intelligently at the moment. But there is a certain life on these payments, and there are, there are different stipulations. If this happens, then there'll be this payment, or if this happens, there'll be this other payment, kind of a situation.
Eric's going to talk about the fuel system fund found on page 200.
All right, up until just this current fiscal year, the fuel system fund used to fall under motor pool. We took the opportunity when we moved from the old service center to the new one to split it out and to capture the expenditures that way. Right now, when we moved, we changed our fuel surcharge a little bit. I believe we were about 19 cents. We bumped that up to 22. The fuel surcharge hadn't changed for a number of years. And we charge, what's that? 13 cents. So it had been quite a significant jump. That hadn't been changing quite some time, but with the new cost of equipment and whatnot, the cost to operate the system, it justified itself. We were able to keep all our users, as you see under statistics. Marquette area public schools chose not to take part. They went to a different vendor, but we did pick up NMU. They show really low usage. We anticipate more than that because they didn't come on till at least halfway through the year. So that should come up a little bit. And we actually have had some interest from the BLP as well to buy fuel. The way it works is we charge the actual cost of the fuel, whatever it is we buy at market rate. We add on the 22 cents a gallon, and that covers the operation of it, and as well as the capital expenditures from the future when we have to replace the system. So when you go through the expenditure side of it, it's pretty much lays it out. It's like I said, it's a relatively new fund. We've been doing it a long time, but it was always buried in motor pool, and now with it being out, gives you an idea of where we're spending the money. But we do budget about $615,000 just for fuel, and that really comes in if it's a light snow year or a heavy snow year, and we budget towards the high side just to make sure that we're covered, so that we don't have a shortfall, since motor pools, you can see in the statistics side, does use a majority of the fuel, a vast majority of the fuel. So in looking at the statistics, you can see this year was a little bit heavier year. That's why we're at that, we're anticipating 100,000 gallon mark.
Eric, notionally, what are we saving on a gallon basis? I mean, I understand that pricing goes all over the place, but just a swag.
You know, we buy it wholesale, so I mean, we spot buy it, and it's right off the, you know, they take it out of Green Bay, and we pay what the gas stations pay, and I can't tell you what they mark it up, because there's the taxes involved too, since we don't pay taxes. It's a tough one to, you think 60 cents?
Okay, so I mean,
And-
it is a significant amount of money for the people that are using it then.
It is, and it's a convenience thing. It's open 24/7.
Yep.
You know, I mean, we're available all the time. Our uptime's fantastic, and you know, with the new card access system we have, we have a very robust billing system, and they can track usage and all that.
Thank you.
Peter?
Everybody else says the public schools backed out and they went somewhere else, but anybody else, you said maybe interviews and maybe BLP are picking up slack a little bit. Anybody else, maybe some of the commercial accounts like Checker Cab or one of those companies that uses a lot of gas, maybe look into something like that, or anybody else looking into it?
Since we're non-taxable, it has to be nonprofits that
Gotcha.
that wouldn't pay the road tax, so it gets a little sticky there.
It's a
So we
little sticky.
stick with the nonprofits. Yep.
You guys are good. I know the vendor we use to get our fuel for our shop, you just call them and they can deliver anytime. Is that what you guys do? Is like you say, okay, we're low on fuel, we need fuel right away, and you give a call and they come up and get it for you, or what?
Yeah, we'll do it. We order a whole truck at a time, so, with the new system that we put in, we're able to take full trucks, because when you start splitting trucks, you get into, cost issues.
Yep.
So we size the tanks appropriately. When we know we're getting lower, we can take a truck. We call down to Green Bay. There's 3 or 4 distributors, and depending on who the lowest price is, or
Yep.
who offers a price that day, because sometimes they say, I can't get you fuel. And that, we've run into that, but we've always been able to maintain the tanks.
Yeah, I know a couple times the marina a few mariners ran out of fuel a couple times, and they
Yeah,
you
they
guys
run
had
a little different deal since
a
they're
little
so
bit
small.
different style. Gotcha.
They're only a couple thousand gallons. We're,
Gotcha.
we're, 20,000
You got a little bit more for your trucks.
I was just going to say one point of interest on the surcharge. When we were in discussions with the university, they have one tank or 2 tank that's above ground?
2, I think.
2 tanks above ground, and internally they were charging themselves 25 cents or charging the other departments. So after hearing that, we felt that the 22 cents that we were proposing was actually in line with where it should have been.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Just an observation pointed out, we may have a conversation with the Peter White. In the last 2 years, they've almost doubled their consumption up to 30 gallons versus a 17 in 2000. Somebody said to keep it light earlier, so that's my effort right there. That's all I've got.
Get Blake's guys to start reducing the fuel in their police cars. Maybe tell them to turn the heat on, turn the fuel off.
Okay, we'll come back to the stormwater account, the 555 account, and that's on page 202.
And Mike is going to start this one off.
On the later side, I know of one of the guys that's retired from one of your departments said he didn't come back up the fire department, but he said he'd like you to come back up you for a budget session.
I'm going to interject at this point in the discussions, because we're moving on to stormwater and water and sewer, and this is, in essence, where we're going to begin the discussion about the rates and rate increases. Just as a little bit of background, and maybe to answer some of the questions that have been presented, of course, if I don't answer them now, they will be answered during the course of this entire discussion, which I think will be a little lengthy, or could be lengthy. Some time ago, it's been a year at least, I think, Kurt, when we employed an outside consultant to review our water and sewer and stormwater rates. I'm not quite sure how we were calculating increases prior to that. I hesitate to say that they were based on our best guess, but we took it upon ourselves and thought it to be a good idea that we try to nail down what we really should be charging for these services. The we did not engage in a rate increase last year or this current budget year. For the main reason that, there's two reasons. One is that we were doing this study, and two was that we were moving ahead with the Johnson Control improvements, and we weren't sure what, if any, effect they would have on what we were going to propose for rate increases. The study that we asked to have done in the numbers that we're going to give you today, which you've seen previously, are based on what we believe and what our consultants believe are, in some respects, the minimum option, the minimum amount. Now, we're going to give you some other options today, but there's certainly not options that we recommend to achieve what we really want to achieve. And what we want to achieve, or what we're trying to convince you that we need to achieve, is a rate system that does three things. First, balances the costs versus the revenues versus the costs of running the system. Two is allowing us to pay cash for maintenance and improvements as opposed to bonding and borrowing or borrowing from the general fund. And three is to add or build a reserve that can be used for larger projects and future endeavors. In other words, an enterprise type situation. It is a little bit integral, and I wanted to make this point that we're going to be asking for a lot. There's no doubt about that. And I know one of the questions is, why aren't we spreading this out over many years? We are. And that's the scary part. The numbers that we're giving you today are meant to be, are numbers that are calculated to be spread out over at least 5 years. And this plan that we're presenting will take 5 years to get just to budget neutral. I know that might be hard to believe, but you know, for example, if we're asking for a 12% water increase rate this year, that isn't going to balance us this year. We're still going to need to borrow from the general fund to balance. If we do 12% every year for 5 years, we will eventually reach a stage where it will balance. That's how far in the hole we are with our water and sewer rates. I'm sure there will be explanations as to why we're in this position, but from my perspective, I think these were difficult decisions that should have been made in the past, should have been made on a regular basis, to help things be a little bit smoother today. I would venture to say that the lower increases that we've received over the last couple of decades have been easy decisions to make, but maybe weren't the right decisions as far as balancing our costs, our budget for costs. But getting back to my original point that, one of my original points was that, you know, you've seen from me and heard from me and others that, you know, we need to come up with a way to improve our general fund revenue because of the losses that we're seeing through tax tribunals, through the closure of the WE energy plant. If we want to continue to maintain the services that we have been providing, we need to replace that revenue. You've seen a partial plan that I presented that has to do with property sales and bond reduction. But this is also considered part of that, even though it's not in that plan, is a part of that whole process, and that by increasing rates or setting or providing you with rates that we think need to be necessary will allow us to spend general fund money in other areas other than the water, sewer, and stormwater areas. In other words, if we can get rates that pay for those services and maybe build up a reserve, we don't have to take money out of the general fund to do that. We can use some of that money to compensate for what we're losing with the we and the tribunals and Proposal A and the Headley Amendment and all those things that are nailing us every year with our revenue. So it's kind of an integral thing. I mean, it's all kind of related. We know these numbers are high. I understand they're high. I understand that they'll have an impact on many people, some of the negative impact. But the numbers we are giving you are not given to you frivolously. I mean, we're not just trying to get rich. We're not trying to make money. We're not trying to build anything new or create a new empire or spend it unwisely. I mean, this is what we need, we believe, and our consultant believes we need to have to function. I'll let Kurt begin the discussion, and I think you have and Gary and I think Kurt will follow through with a PowerPoint on the screens that will allow the public to see what we're talking about as well. So I think I've said just about everything I need to say. Kurt, anything to add to my?
I'll add a couple of things.
Okay. Just make sure everything I said, don't point out anything that was wrong, okay?
I guess one question. Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Mayor, Commission. Is there a taser in the room?
Mm-hmm.
No. Yeah, Mike summed up very good. One thing I want to say that this is something that I've been working on with a lot of other departments for the last 2 years. When you think about utilities, it's really a effort by a lot of departments. You know, we got Scott Comenzi overseeing the collection system for water, and sanitary. Engineering plays a huge role. The work that Keith does in the capital improvement is just outstanding. The detail, all of this information that has been available, we've put together into this, I call it a financial plan. I believe it's been at least 15, 20 years where the city has actually hired a financial consultant. It's a little bit more in the rate study. For the documents and the recommendations that we're making, there are just pages and pages of background information. Another thing is about 5 years ago, the state came out with pretty much a mandatory regulatory policy, I guess. What they've done, the state's pretty smart. Whenever they want to get something done, they could see that there was challenges for infrastructure. Communities were falling behind. They weren't putting money into their infrastructure. And that resulted in a lot of neglect of their systems. Instead of being a little bit proactive, taking care of your system, things were costing more, emergencies, water boils, that type of stuff. So they put some language on our NPDS permit that's tied to our wastewater plant, that we had to come up with a financial plan that makes our utilities solvent. That means expenses and revenues. They've given us 5 years to do that. But the state was also smart. It said to do that, it takes money. So about 5 years ago, I submitted it's called a SAW grant. It's a stormwater, asset management, and wastewater. What it is, it's a grant that oversees, that gives us the dollars to really take a hard look at our utilities. With that SAW grant, we're on our third. It's a 3-year grant. And we're finishing it up this month. We were able to do a really detailed asset inventory of all of our vertical assets, like our wastewater plant, our lift stations, and also, more important, we were able to televise all of our sanitary sewers, our stormwater sewers. Keith's department went and evaluated over, I believe, 6,000 manholes, stormwater structures, And all of this information has now been put on a GIS system. So what we're able to do is when we make decisions, we've really got some good information to make the right decisions. Again, the governor always supported that when you do an infrastructure project, don't just look at paving the road. You got to look at what's underneath the road. So what you try and do is you pick roads, and that's where the engineering department has done a really good job prioritizing what areas to do in the city. You may have a 20-year-old water main, but the road might be bad, but you really have to look at the big picture, how many cars travel. So that's how the CIP is prioritized. Another thing too, we are reviewing our sewer ordinance with this grant. I'm doing a complete review of the stormwater ordinance. So those are other components that we've been able to do when you talk utility. And one thing before I do want to thank all of the departments that have been, participating in this. It's my job is to administer this grant and really to get the bang out of the buck and provide the commission and the residents the information to make good, sound decisions. So just Gary just reminded me, as part of the SAW grant, we will be posting that on the city website. It will be a complete, our asset management. It will have all the documents that we've gone through in the last 3 years, and that is one requirement of the SAW grant. Another component of the SAW grant that the commission passed about a month ago is a stormwater management plan. That will also be on the SAW grant. And so that is coming eventually. That will all be available to the public. Yeah, we do. I believe it was July 30th. We did have a work session with the city commission. Our financial consultant was here and did a pretty good, thorough evaluation or presentation of how these recommendations came. With the city's manager, we will put that on the website.
Yeah, I mean, for people who want to find it now, where is it available?
It's not on the website at this time, but.
It's public and we can make it available.
Yeah, it is public and we'll make that available. But again, this I'm going to do a short presentation. Basically what it does, it looks at some options moving forward for the 3 utilities. Once again, a lot of this information, these recommendations are based on the Raphael's Tellus. I'm going to say it wrong. Presentation and the work session. And then we did incorporate a few additional slides for this meeting here to explore some other options that was provided at the work session. So you'll be seeing those for the first time. Let's see, what page is that? 30. Okay. 34. Okay, on page 30. 34. Well, 34. On page 34, this is the stormwater. The study is recommending a 15.25% increase. And the recommended increase will target after reserves for 90 days for O&M and also debt service. So what we're trying to do is when we say a financial plan, we're starting to start the process of eventually having reserves available for 90-day for emergency. I believe the recommendation typically is 6 months. But just to keep it, a little bit more, easier to swallow, we based the study on 90 days. And also, we'll be able to start cash funding some capital improvements in 2023. But to get started, just to get balance the budget with minimizing impact on the general fund reserves, the recommendation is 15.25%.
Well, what we did, we asked the consultant to come up with different options. So the recommended option that was presented at the work session is 15.25%. And that's not just a one-year thing, as Mike said, it's really a 5-year plan. But what we asked the consultant to do was to come up with a rate. What would it be if we didn't pay cash for the capital projects and we continued bonding as we do? And that is showing up as the reduced rate, which is 13.5%. Then we asked the consultant to go further. What is the bare bones? What if we just tried to break even, which is what we've been doing over the past several years, to not really good success either. But that strips out paying cash for capital projects, and it also strips out cash for any reserve funds. So the bare bones minimum is 12.25% for stormwater. And you'll see the same scenario for the water and the sewer funds. But this is really what we're strongly recommending, the recommended part, but we did want to provide options, and that's what we have for the stormwater.
Can I ask a question? So you're saying if we didn't charge any, the minimum is 12.25.
And that just barely breaks even. If
You have to raise it 12.25 to break
if
even.
everything comes in like we projected, 12.25% is what we need.
Last year we didn't raise it.
Correct. We did not we needed to do rate increases for the current fiscal year, but we were doing the study, so we were hoping the study would actually have been done in May. But because of other things happening, we're just now getting to it. So really, when you look at these rate increases, this does take into account that for the current fiscal year we're in now, there were no rate increases. So if we had implemented rate increases for this year, what you're seeing would have been a little bit lower, not a whole lot lower, but a little bit lower.
Right.
Okay, let's go back a little further. When's the last time we had a rate increase?
It would have been FY17.
And
Which
were we
was
doing it each year
2 years
previous to that? They should know this.
Pretty much every year. It kind of varied.
Yeah.
What we were doing, particularly in the water and the sewer, what we weren't anticipating was over the past 5 years, we've seen a 25% decrease in billable flows.
Yeah.
So what we were seeing as we raised rates, we were seeing an almost equal decrease in billable flows. So we weren't able to even catch up. We were still playing behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And those were just things we could not foresee. We were just pulling our head out. And finally I threw up the white flag, and that's why we brought in the consultant. And
Let me ask one.
and basically what the good news is the consultant confirmed what we were seeing. The bad news is the consultant confirmed what we were seeing. So.
So in previous years, each year, we've had an increase, up until last year.
Yeah, and it
Okay,
varied.
so I'm
It
just saying,
varied.
the BLP, remember what the problem we had with them is we went 20 years without an increase. Then all of a sudden, we got the 30% increase,
Correct.
which is not a good way to do it.
Yeah.
But the city has been, with their water, raising it each year.
Yeah,
So this is not a abnormal.
This is not. This is what we would have been recommending anyway without the rate consultant. It's just that the rate consultant confirmed what we've been seeing.
So this 12.25, you got to do this just to break even.
That's just to break
We're not making anything on it?
Over 5 years, too.
Yeah.
We're still, this first year, we're still gonna be in the hole.
Well, what's going to happen next year? Will the rates go up?
Yep, this
Right.
is a 5-year.
So we get 12.25 this year, next year, a little bit more.
That's just to
It won't be
stay-
12.25, it'll be
Yes,
That's pretty much the plan. yes.
12.25 each year?
per year. For 5 years, just to break even.
Okay, just so we know this, I mean, so, okay. But the difference between that and the 15 is, which you would like to see, is only 3%. To me, that's a small number. I mean, if you're gonna have some pain, you might as well just increase it a little bit, and, it's just,
Yeah.
okay.
In
I
an
mean, if you
ideal
gotta do 12.25, you might as well do 15, but that's the argument.
Yeah.
To me, if you're gonna get it, you might as well.
Well, you,
In an ideal world, that is the case, where we would just have inflationary increases. But the way we've been doing it, we've been paying for capital projects by issuing bonds. So we got increased rates to pay the debt service. And then, like I said, too, we've been fighting off billable flows, what we're able to bill out. That's been decreasing astronomically.
So people are conserving when they see their bills going up. They're no longer taking a shower every day. It's every third day or whatever it is they do.
And believe me, we are sensitive to those things. We don't do this lightly at all, because it hits us as well. I got to pay the same increases that we're recommending.
Okay. Fred, you had a question?
Yeah, let me put this in perspective, because we're talking about billable flows and we're talking about things that people kind of roll their eyes on. What has essentially happened is that the city has a certain infrastructure for the delivery of safe drinking water, sewage, as well as stormwater. That's a given cost to maintain that infrastructure. And we have that all the time. We fix, we repair. We're not expanding, we're fixing and repairing and maintaining the infrastructure. And the cost to do that raises incrementally per year based on inflation and the price of tea in China, as does everything. But because we've been increasing rates, people have been conserving. They haven't been using as much as they typically would use. But because they haven't been using as much, they haven't been paying as much. So therefore, the money that was anticipated to come in to pay for the repairs and the maintenance of the infrastructure hasn't been there. So you look at the big offenders with that, Northern Michigan University, for example. I was in the PEEF today and taking a shower after working out, and I looked up and all of the faucets now have the super doopy water saver heads on. Give you about 1 cubic inch of water per day. Well, they're saving water, but what they're really doing is raising the rates for everybody, because you still have to pay for the maintenance and repair of the infrastructure. Does that make sense? We may find that counterintuitive, but the more you save, the less it costs. And that's the argument that we're trying to work our way through here. In a perfect world, if people had simply continued to use what they were using in past years as the rates increased, we arguably would not be in this situation. But because we save water, we don't spend as much. The income to maintain the structure, which is fixed, you can't get rid of it. It's fixed. It's there. It delivers clean drinking water to us, is a given. The problem is we got to feed the beast. We've got to pay the cost of that. That's really what we're talking about.
Paul was first.
I don't know if I want to be. That's a really good way to put that, Fred. Thank you. And I was heading in the same direction, and I would look for some clarification on something else. It all comes down to, I think about it with 3 girls in the family, flushes. How many flushes are we doing? I looked at my my usage after the initial work session that we did. I'm under the average of 4,000 gallons for my household. I'm still, that's what it reads on there. I hope the property size and that stuff doesn't come into that equation, but the gallons that I used, I was still under the 4,000. Now, with Margaret's concern, which is very valid, and her mother being a champion, or at least she was a few years ago when I was over there, a champion tomato grower, her numbers I would bet fall well underneath, probably even 2,000 gallons. I don't know, I'm assuming. But, you know, the average household using 4,000 gallons is something that we really have to keep in mind. What do you truly use? What will your rate truly adjust to versus the average house of 4,000 gallons? But am I correct in assuming that if we, it's actually going to be higher than this, but at 12.5%, if we used that one, that would be a 61.25% increase total if we did it all right now. Actually, maybe that's not correct, because we would be doing 12.5% of our adjusted next year's rate, which has got a 12.5% increase on top of that. Yeah, so we're talking, I mean, we could essentially be doubling our bill in 5 years. That's what we're shooting at. That's really painful. I get where you're going. I like the efficiencies. I like low flush toilets. I like the direction that we're going as far as using less. But I also appreciate what Fred said there with the fact that, you know, it's just not being used. That money's not there. We're paying less than we were. I think something that I'm hoping we're going to touch on, I just want to throw it out there now because I'm getting long-winded again. Let's talk about some of the services that we're going to have to chop. You know, what if? What are those things that people are going to have to do without? Should we need to make those tough decisions? Because this is a really large pill to swallow here. So that's all I have. Thank you for now.
Fred? Mike.
Just to go along with that, and just before I say anything else, I want to communicate that I get it. I know what you guys are talking about. I know what you want to do, and I understand the problems of the past. And I've voted in the past to alleviate some of those issues with other areas. But I don't see a document. I don't know if you have one or not. But if you don't, I'd like to see one. If you do, I'd like to know where it is. That says specifically, if you pay $100 a month in water nowadays, what will you pay in 5 years from now? I want to see that specifically. I know you've got a couple of documents that say ultimately this is what you're going to pay, but I want something that can compare. Right now I'm paying $100. What will I pay in 5 years? Now you also talk about stormwater 15.25%, water 12.25%, and sewer 25%. Commissioner Schlegel talked about 12.25% just a moment ago. Are we adding the 15.25% to that plus the 25% for sewer? Is that all added together? Or are we just talking about 12%, 12%, 12% for the next 5 years, and that's going to cover it?
Yeah. Well, each one will be a little bit different. We were just focusing on stormwater, but we'll get into water and sewer. But the slide I just put up shows, using the recommended rate, how each one will increase.
What page are you on,
over the
Gary?
5-year period. That is page 29, I think.
But to answer your question, the three will be, all three increases would occur. Just one for all three, but all three separate increases.
So really what we're talking about is a 52% increase in the bill just in
Yes.
the first year.
Yeah, well, yes, if you total it up.
And then another 52% and another 52% over 5 years.
Well, the last page, page 35, shows just the 1-year increase, how that will increase. So if you use the recommended rate, all three utilities, just for your average customer, will be, the monthly increase will be $16.78 per month.
And that's for everything.
That's for all three. for
And
1 year.
how much is the bill, oh, that's based on 4,000 gallons. What's the average bill what's the bill for 4,000 gallons at this point?
Yeah, that is it. The average is about 4,000 is the estimate, and what we're showing here is based on 4,000 gallons. Yep, this is the increase.
So as I see this, am I correct when I say then that if you have a $99 and $57 bill, it's going to go up to $116 approximately?
Well, I don't see what the current one is, but
83.
it would be approximately $83 currently. And if you use the recommended rate for all three utilities, it would go up to 99.57, which is an increase and that's per month. And that's an increase of $16.78 per month.
Okay, because that's what we're going to be asked. What is exactly the dollar amount? What am I going to have to pay? Percentages are fine. They're all well and good. Not too many people are really good at percentages. They want to know what kind of a check am I going to have to write? And that's what I'm trying to get at here. And like I said, I understand what you're doing, and I don't disagree with it at all. And I'm willing to make tough decisions, but I've got to have everything I need to make those decisions before I make it. I know you understand that. I appreciate the information that you give us. And I also understand, I know that you appreciate how tough a decision this is, especially in an election year, just to mention that. Because it's not all that's involved here. Okay, that works. Thanks.
Fred?
Sorry.
Yeah, Kurt, I'm looking at a rate study. This is the 2017 rate study of what communities and townships and cities are paying throughout the Upper Peninsula for water and waste. Currently, Marquette is about in the middle of the pack.
Correct.
For all communities and all cities in the Upper Peninsula. And we're paying, according to this, this is based on 5,000 gallons water and sewage combined. We're paying about, and again, this is notional, right? About $56.49 a month. This is what the study says.
That water and sewer?
Water and sewer.
Right. And
Putting that in comparison, Houghton County is paying $244 for the same 5,000 gallons.
correct.
And looking down the highway a little piece here, Munising paying about 135. Let me take it just a little bit further. Ishpeming, 137. Nagani, somewhere on about 125.
Each one is different.
I don't see Marquette Township, but I know it's right in that same ballpark. Marquette Township paying 139. So my point being that even though we're seeing rate structures that are far, far higher than we would be used to paying, that's the real world for many places in the Upper Peninsula. So you might make the argument that we have been paying under what we should have been paying for a long time. And like Commissioner Plord, percentages don't mean anything to me. It's got to be down to reduce the dollars and cents of what it would cost, because I think that's how people will look at it, and that's how people will evaluate it. Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I remember the question I did want to ask also. We'd already established that part of the issue we have here is the fact that when rates have gone up, people have used less water, which has put a bit of a strain on the system, and I understand that as well. People are working hard to conserve water. If we were to agree to the recommended amount, what's your plan, or is it built in to compensate for people who, again, and some people will have to conserve and be using less water based on this? Because people are going to some people are going to have to pay the same $88 or the same $50 that they're paying, whether they like it or not. They're just going to have to. So that means they're going to use less water overall. Is that going to continue to put a strain on the system? In other words, what we're trying to do, are we going to, in effect, cut our own throat by doing it this way because people are going to have to reduce the amount of water they're going to use?
Yeah, and I believe the consultant kind of took that into consideration. Now, what we're recommending is, the consultant recommended the recommended rates over a 5-year period, and we all saw that at the work session. But what we would like to do is each year sort of revisit it, and particularly after year 3, bring the consultant back in just to make sure we're on track. But the consultant did try to take all of that into consideration, but it's really just a guessing game. We really don't know what's going to happen until it happens.
And excuse my interruption, but the city attorney has, I think, a comment he'd like to make as well that might help.
I just mentioned this to Mike. Utility rates are actually provided for in the charter. And so if you go to section 3-11 under rates, it says that rates and charges of any municipal public utility for the furnishing of water, light, heat, power, or gas shall be fixed, so fixed as to meet at least all the costs of such utility. There shall be no discrimination in such rates within any classification of users, nor shall free service be permitted, but higher rates may be charged for service outside the city limits. And those utility services sold outside the city can be fixed to provide at least a reasonable rate of return. But I mean, the charter tells you what you can and cannot do. It says shall. I don't know what numbers Gary and Kurt are talking about, which one is the shall or shall not. But I mean, this is a requirement of the charter. It's not something that you have a lot of flexibility with, just to let you know.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I do appreciate that. And I understand that. I like I say, I know what we're trying to do, and I don't disagree with it. I don't. We're trying to make our water system and our sewer system essentially pay for itself, and to be able to make repairs that are essential. If you look around the country, there are several instances where infrastructure was not repaired, and they're suffering for it now. And I've mentioned it many times in city commission meetings. What we don't pay for now, we're going to have to pay a lot more for later. So really, I understand that. And I also understand, I agree, and I believe the city manager when he says, we're not trying to get rich here. We're just trying to pay for what we have and provide the services that people are, not only are they used to, but they expect and are entitled to. I do understand that. And I know you understand as well that for some people, it is going to be a hardship. That's important to me, though. That for some people, it is going to be a hardship. And I think there's more work to be done here to make sure that everybody gets the water that they've been getting without too much of an impact. And I think as we're sitting here right now, this is maybe some of the beginning. The work is not going to get done tonight, but that's a concern for me, and I just want to make that known. It's going to be tough on some people. And as Margaret Brum had mentioned, she's got a great example. Hers is not the only one. I'm very concerned about people. Colleen Roberts as well. I understand what you're talking about. So we're definitely going to keep that in mind and do our best to work through it. Peter.
Not to really beat a dead horse here, but I know it's been a hard subject since I've been a commissioner for water. Sewer rates has always been a problem because a lot of sewers and water have to get replaced around town. They're pretty old and they have to get fixed up as well. So if we had done like 1 to 3% over like last 5 years, it'd be up to 15 by now. I'm just thinking, I hate, looking at all this increases, and I voted for BLP update. That was a while back, but you found ways around trying to help with that. You could buy LED light bulbs or do something around that. So you figure out ways around, like just with, you could be able to use less water. That's the problem is you raise the rates and like people, like everybody said, you use less water, get fake grass, less showers, flush toilets less, who knows, figure out some way to do it. So whatever raise the rates, we're going to figure a way to save money, but I mean, it's not going to work. Because I think most people understand, you're talking about taking out of the general fund for everything, we raise rates in marina, can't take out a general fund. I mean, raise rates at tourist park, can't take out, every place that Lakeview Arena, all these places that we have, that we say you can't take a general fund anymore, people understand that. But with sewer waterways, it's something everybody uses. And people don't mind, say, okay, well, if you take out a general fund, we have to sacrifice something. People understand that with, we don't take it out of Gary's pocket so much, and you take it out of Mike's pocket better, but.
I do want to add, too, that part of the equation, and one thing we're trying to do is get some development going. And as these developments go in, hopefully we see, billable flows increase, and that will put less pressure on the increases we have to raise rates on. Sure. So that's a factor we have going on now. Now it's going to be probably a couple of years at least before we see any impact on that, but that is, with me being the forever optimist, that's kind of what I'm hinging that's on too.
So what you're really recommending is that we pass the, I guess I'll call it the original recommendation from the consultants for the three fields, in other words, for stormwater, wastewater, and water. And we relook that every year as we see where we are with where we should be. So we're not really making a decision to say for 5 years we're going to do this. What we're doing is passing a year one of this, and then we'll have a chance, once you begin to track, I hate to use the word, billable flows, to see where we are within the pricing structure. And then that gives us a chance to make another increase if needed, or decrease, or change, or based on what's reality, right?
Yeah, that's a very good way to look at it. And I mean, the hope is that each year we don't have to increase the rates as much as has been recommended, but from what the consultant is seeing, that's what they're recommending for the 5-year plan. But each year we will take a fresh look at it, and the rates are increased through changes in ordinance, so we do have to go through the ordinance amendment process, which requires public hearing.
Right.
So it will always be a part of the budget discussion, but there will also be separate discussion because to change the ordinance, we have to have a public hearing, and then we'll schedule a public hearing, then hold the public hearing, and then adopt the ordinance.
And then it's also fair to understand that doing this, in part obviously because the system is going broke and we need to put it on a strong financial basis, but also because the state of Michigan is saying thou shall do this. Thou shall have a financially stable
Correct.
system.
Yep.
And to do that, we've got to come up with the funding as we've been discussing. So we're caught two ways: the financial reality that we have to balance the system, and the state of Michigan that says you have to balance the system.
Correct.
Thank you. But in the charter, also they're saying you must balance the system.
Mr. Mayor? Yes, Mike.
I'd like to add to what Mayor Pro Tem Stonehouse mentioned. We're getting a lot less money from Lansing. It's been going on for a long time. If you're complaining about what we're charging and what we're not, or what we don't have in the city, then go out and vote in November. It is crucial that you go out and vote in November and you understand where the revenue sharing has been taken away from us and by who. But Michigan has been negative in revenue sharing for the last 3 years. We're the only state in the union that's been negative in revenue sharing. That is an issue here. If we had gotten the revenue sharing that we should have had and traditionally would have had, except for the fact that politicians in Lansing have essentially withheld our money, this would not be an issue now at all. That's something that really needs to be said, and it piggybacks on what Mayor Pro Tem Stonehouse has just said. And again, really, I understand that. What people need to understand is we need to get that voice out. There's two ways to get your voice out. Number one, send emails or communications to Lansing, to our state representatives and senators and governor. And number two, vote. Simple as that. November is coming up. Get out and vote. So.
Thank you. Paul?
Mr. City Manager, you mentioned the term enterprise, becoming an enterprise, with the increases in having building up the fund so that we didn't have to rob Peter to pay Paul, or the general fund, or things along those lines. Can you explain what you mean by that? I mean, what is the essence of the becoming an enterprise?
Sure. Well, basically, it to use examples we've already discussed, the marinas, the tourist park, basically the fees that we charge for the use of those facilities. In this case, these services actually are high enough to pay for the costs of the service plus
Okay.
build a reserve to maintain, expand, and take care of that particular service. In other words, it's not money that we typically would spend on
Yep.
on another part of the city.
Okay, thanks. And the reason I wanted that kind of better defined is because the meeting that we had in Parks and Rec the other night, we were talking about how, there were certain sinkholes within our city, whether it be tourist park or something else, that for years was one of those major swallowers of massive amounts of the general fund that are now able to kind of fund themselves because of the changes that were made. And that's where the point that I wanted to kind of bring up with this, for anybody out there that might be wondering what the heck that meant. Man. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Correct me on this. What I'm seeing is we absolutely have to do a 12.25% increase. Otherwise, we're going downhill. If we do that, it's stormwater only, and corresponding to the other water usages. All three taken together will give an increase to someone who uses 4,000 gallons a month of about $16 or $17.
Right.
That's on the recommended?
Recommended. Right.
16, okay. Minimal is how much?
On the minimum.
846 on the minimum plan per
8
month.
to 16. I wouldn't have guessed that because it's a 3%. Oh, just on this one. That's right, because it's 25% on water.
Right.
I don't have that in front of me.
Well, water is 12 and a quarter as well. It was sewer that was the
Sewer's
first year's
25.
recommended a 25% increase.
Okay.
And the reason for that is the sewer is flat out broke. There's actually negative cash in the sewer, so that's why we need such a large increase, is just to try to get it up to zero.
Okay.
And so actually, the other utilities and even the general fund to an extent is covering the sewer overdrawn cash. So if it were a standalone entity, it's not one anybody would be investing in by any means.
$8 is $8, but we almost can't afford to keep where we are. We have to build. And that's not a popular statement, but there's not a lot of wiggle room here. I see it. We got to suck it up. I'm sorry, Jenna.
So it sounds like we may be pulling some general fund dollars already for these projects. Is that correct?
Well, the general fund is helping to cover the cash overages. Like the water fund does have some cash, but we're starting to see that dwindle. The sewer has negative cash. The stormwater has just a little bit, but just like if we had another freeze emergency, even though for the last one we were fully reimbursed for the expenses, there was a period of time where we had to cover those expenses because we had to pay the bills. And that would severely, city would suffer greatly if we had to go through that again.
Could you explain, maybe Gary or Mike, in Houghton recently they had some flooding, how we're better prepared or how this might put us in a better situation to be prepared if we did pass these rate increases?
I can't really speak to Houghton. My understanding is they didn't have the stormwater plan that we have, and that's why their roads completely washed out. Now, we did have a significant rain event just yesterday or a couple of days ago to where we did see some damage, but because of the work that had already been done, it greatly reduced what we could have seen.
And I'll be honest, before that rain we had yesterday, I was more on the fence about whether or not I would be in support of these rate increases, and I was speaking with the city manager and how anxious I was about what had happened in Houghton, and are we at the same level of risk? And after talking with him, I do really think that we need to do some sort of a rate increase, even though it's pretty tough. So that's kind of where I stand right now. I do have one question about, so stormwater, water, sewer have their own designated funds. They kind of operate like their own little entities. I guess I'm trying to see the difference, and I apologize if this is kind of a silly question, but we're funding Lakeview Arena at about $300,000 a year from the general fund, and we just accept that as what we have to do, and yet we're not doing that for the stormwater, for the water and the sewer, which could be seen as more essential functions for the city. So just kind of explain how we make those decisions. And
Well, it's very well noted. We've gone down the road of Lakeview Arena trying to be budget neutral. We have not been successful. To be honest with you, the pushback from the community to actually pay for ice time as much as it costs to make ice was huge. And not just the city. I'm talking about people who use the ice. We have tried to make that an enterprise. It is, well, a fully functioning enterprise fund, but just have not been able to convince the previous commissions to swallow that pill.
to make Lakeview its own enterprise
Yes,
fund?
to
Okay.
actually charge what it costs to run it.
Mhm.
And so we've kind of fallen back into this comfort level of just subsidizing it. We're always willing to look at things like that. I mean, we just went through a huge, long process with the marinas, for example, which was very difficult for a lot of people to deal with and to accept and to understand. And we've been working on that, not just me, but previous administrations for decades to try to make the marinas actually pay for themselves, because they were bleeding off close to an equal amount of what Lakeview Arena was for a lot smaller group of users. And so we got that through. And we got the tourist park thing through a while ago. And, you know, when it comes to Lakeview, like I said, we've made that attempt before, and it just never worked out. But if you let Gary at it, I mean, I think he would love to see, and so would I, that any one of these functions that we actually bill for pay for themselves. So it just so happens water and sewer is the topic today.
Yeah.
And
I guess I'm trying to figure out why
Yeah.
we choose to treat some different than others, and to me, there should be a standard approach.
And if I could say too, and this is a bean counter explanation, and I don't expect anybody to understand it, but it also depends on the different classifications. Lakeview Arena is officially a special revenue fund. For your special revenue funds, the intent is there will be some charges to cover the costs, but it's also expected the general fund will cover the remaining cost. Now, the water, sewer, stormwater, marina, and tourist park are all enterprise funds. And the bean counter explanation, which has already been explained, is enterprise funds are meant to fully fund themselves. And special revenues are not. At one time, we tried to make Lakeview Arena an enterprise fund, but it would have required extensive increases in ice time, and there was a lot of pushback from the community, so that never happened. So we just kept it as a special revenue.
And to be clear, I'm not asking for that. I'm not recommending that. I'm just trying to understand why we're funding that at $300,000. I'm just trying to understand the differences in how we approach things, but I do see a kind of a discrepancy there and where the priorities may lay.
Paul.
Sorry. One of the other factors here is property size base, correct? You're basing this off of 4,000 gallons, 1/5 acre or less.
Yeah, that's for stormwater.
Okay. So how is that going to change for somebody that has larger parcel? Is it going to be impacted? Say you're up in Shiras and you got a full acre.
Yeah, the stormwater fee is calculated by the property size,
So it'd be the same
Stormwater.
percentage increase. It's just that your larger
Oh, I see.
users will pay more dollar-wise, but percentage-wise, it'd be the same. But depending on, like, if you're a business, what size your lines are and that kind of a thing is how it's based on.
So that's already factored in to their current bills. Okay, so it really is just it's the same percentage, it's just a different, you're just eating a
So
different
what
one.
we're showing is just an example of an average resident.
Yep.
Now, maybe a lot of residents could be seeing less, some could be seeing more. Your businesses are most likely going to be seeing more, but the percentage increases will remain the same regardless of what classification you put in.
Thank you.
Yeah, just parroting on what Commissioner Smith said when she was talking about Lakeview Arena and general fund transfers and related. I don't know that that would be considered a solution by the state in terms of the economic viability of the enterprise. I mean, if you're saying that we're gonna fund water by simply transferring money from the general fund, I don't think that's an answer.
Yeah, that's exactly what the state is trying to let these communities know, that some of the communities that are keeping their water sewer rates very low, a lot of times they are and not taking care of their infrastructure. They are transferring a lot of the general funds.
Yeah, and I mean, their preferred solution, maybe their directed solution is to make the fund pay for itself.
Mm-hmm. That's the goal, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Peter.
I guess coming on what Paul was saying is, stormwater resources by property is one thing in acres, but there's a lot of areas in the town that don't have stormwater. I mean, like, I just live Marquette Drive, and there's not really any stormwater up there. I mean, it's all calculated. I know that's been brought up before. There's a lot of areas, like maybe up in Sheriff's Hills, places that don't have, like I live on Lake Shore, so there's lots of stormwater. I don't have a problem paying with that because I know it helps, but that's the thing is, raising these rates for people that don't have any access to stormwater. That's one thing just to think about. So we'll be here for the rest of the night if we talk about this forever.
Okay, we're at a low point here.
Somebody said, keep it light, man.
So you're telling us this is what you would like to see?
We still got we got 3 budgets to go through.
Where do we go after this? I mean, these are stormwater, wastewater, regular water. This is your recommendation.
This is the recommendation from the consultant and the staff.
Well, I think we kind of hashed it out pretty good.
You gave me your answer already.
It's going up. People aren't going to be, nobody wants to see anything go up. But I can see where there's not a lot of choice here.
One thing Fred did mention, when you look at the survey done in 2017, believe me, a lot of those communities that were way down here, they're going up. So there's going to be a lot of movement in that the survey that was just completed in 2018. Because I know.
And that's not a survey that we did either. That's from the state.
The
Right?
DEQ did that.
It's the DEQ survey. So, if I could just reiterate one more point, that we're not asking for anything that we don't need. We're going to have to pay for this stuff somehow. Either we pay for it through the rate increases, or we pay for it out of borrowing money and applying general fund revenues to pay for it. We're in a unique place. We're losing a huge taxpayer, and from my perspective, the timing couldn't be better to actually take this step, because this will help, I think, considerably, or at least enough to help us with our general fund concerns that we're looking at for the next few years. I wouldn't say that if it wasn't true. But I think what it comes down to from our perspective is, and Commissioner Slagle mentioned it, you know, what do you want to lose? What do you want to give up to maintain the low rates? And we're at a point where it's going to mean something like that. And then you start talking about not plowing a street or not plowing streets a number of times a week. I mean, you start reducing services, and then you get concerns from citizens who are upset about that. And in order to fix that, you got to throw money at that. And then you start talking about millage increases, other ways of raising revenue to compensate for that. And what it comes down to is, you know, this community, I believe, expects a certain level of service. They certainly pay enough for those services, and I think in order to maintain those services, we have to make sure that, or make rate changes like this.
Let me just point something out. A millage, increasing the revenue as suggested by the consultants within this report is a lot cheaper than a millage increase. If you're a homeowner, you don't want a millage. I mean, that's going to be a lot more expensive than certainly what's being suggested here. So that is truly the lesser of two evils. And that second evil is out there rearing its head up because of the funding situation. So that's real. We're gonna whether this commission or another commission has to deal with it, they have to. This is really the cheaper way out, I think. Thank you.
I just see as if your costs have gone up to X amount of dollars, you got to pay that cost. I mean, so we really don't have much of a choice here.
No, and just
Do
to,
we?
again, continue the thought process. You know, it's really by no fault of our own. I mean, we're not spending money frivolously. We're not buying things we shouldn't be buying. Our revenue is declining as a city government, our general fund revenue. And people will say, well, how is that happening? I mean, look at what's going on. Look at this and look at that. Well, none of that, and I'll say this every opportunity I get, none of that trickles down to us. You know, the businesses prosper, the things prosper from the increase in tourism, the increase in traffic, the increase in purchases. But unless they're adding floors to their buildings or adding new buildings or increasing their footprint, that prosperity does not trickle down to us. And when you throw in Proposal A, Headley Amendment, tribunals, we're actually going backwards. And from my perspective, we've been doing a pretty good job keeping up going backwards. We've been making cuts over the years. We've been actually doing more with less. I mean, we've been doing everything we can to try to adapt annually. And, you know, I have to give credit to the staff and Gary especially for doing that. But, you know, we're not, I mean, we're the ones that are kind of suffering from all this prosperity, if you want to put it that way. But, you know, we only have a few avenues of actually gaining revenue for the city. And taxes is the big one, and, you know, rates is the other. And like I said, it's not to make us, you know, all ride around in Cadillacs during the workday. It's to just make us pay the bills that we get every day.
Okay, thank you. Should we be moving on? Let's move on.
So if we could circle back to where page 202, this will be the stormwater, and if Scott, do you handle the expenses on that, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll be page 203, if we could start there.
Dennis went through that.
Dennis went through a good portion of it, as was pointed out. Generally, what Public Works works within is the routine maintenance section in the middle of the page, and that's pretty much status quo. There are a few notes from that account down at the bottom again. Projects for your reconstructions are broken down right above, and then you can see a few of the professional contractual costs are listed out there at the bottom. Superior Watershed is one of those. You've got some unanticipated improvements, if necessary. As the city manager pointed out, one of the cases from last year was right outside City Hall here on 5th Street. Other than that, it's pretty much status quo for the maintenance.
We added curb.
Kurt just pointed out, one of the things that was added to this, under the capital cost up above there is $100,000 a year for curbing replacement. And that'll go into areas that'll be identified as part of a plan upcoming where, probably a block at a time where there's little curb or in some cases no curb whatsoever. Curbing will be replaced to keep stormwater in the street and not flowing off of the street and get it to the catch basins where it can be dealt with.
That's been one of the major complaints from residents, that controlling stormwater in front of their house with the curb, flooding, that type of stuff. And I thought, recommending, and it was accepted to put a line item in, similar to the sidewalk replacement. So it's 100,000. How many linear feet? I'm not sure. But I know engineering and public works will definitely prioritize what area does get done.
Okay. Good.
Okay, if we're done with stormwater, then we'll start with the wastewater treatment plant, page 204.
All right. Okay, the wastewater plant, my passion. I tried 39 years. It's gone through a few changes, but anyways, just want to mention, I think I touched on before, I just want to recognize the staff at the wastewater plant and water plant. We're very fortunate to have a very senior staff, people with a lot of experience. I consider them to do it all. They're mechanics, they're lab people, they're computer people, they're network specialists, they're, believe it or not, they're agronomists, they drive trucks. So just the ability of the staff is pretty impressive. We operate under the state of Michigan and EPA MPDS permit, very regulatory. They watch us very closely, which they should. We do have I think a state-of-the-art facility that was upgraded in 2008. I still think it's one of the best facilities in the Midwest, with the technology and the equipment and that type of stuff. But believe it or not, guess what? It's 10 years old. Time flies. But just starting through the budget on the fact sheet, there was a change in organization a little bit. I went back to water, wastewater. I'm doing a little bit of stormwater. So my salary is now split between water and wastewater. Before it was divided up the last 3 years with public works and different divisions.
Yes.
I think it's significant to note, in fiscal year 2017, you processed 1,110,000,000 gallons of wastewater.
Correct.
And that's a number I think that doesn't get out there very much. And I think it's significant to talk about, Kurt, when you talk about the rate increase that you're looking for. The plant processes a lot of water every 24 hours.
Right. In fact, the other day, with the rain, we hit all-time max of over 12 million gallons. I haven't seen it like that since 1986.
Just for that rain.
Just during that 24-hour period. So, wow. Moving to the fee schedule on 205. Really no changes at all. We do take a hard look at this, look at the cost of service. One change that was the commission approved about 3 months ago was our leachate to be more in line with the other facilities, more competitive. It is 3 cents per gallon. But the rest of the cost for truck wastewater are reviewed each year. And we do get, I'll talk about in the revenues under the wastewater budget of how much truck wastewater. One item we did increase the bacterial analysis. Main reason I did this has not been really increased for over 5-6 years. It affects more the water plant than the wastewater plant, as you'll see. Moving on to page 206. On revenue, once again, the wastewater plant is owned and operated by the city of Marquette, Chocolate Township, and Marquette Township. City of Marquette's, right now it's 85%, Chocolate is 5%, and Marquette Township. We've got a resolution coming to the city commission in September 24th commission meeting. We're going to have the sale of 1%. Chocolate Township is buying 1% of plant capacity from the city and 1% from the Marquette Township. So I'm just finishing up the amendment to our intergovernmental agreement, and that will go into effect October 1st.
And that's to accommodate the casino project in Chocolate Township.
Yes, correct. And that will have that will reduce some of the fixed cost, demand costs from by the intergovernmental agreement. Like the debt is a good example. We pay, City of Marquette pays 85%. Moving forward, we'll be paying 84%. One area that it's hard to is under revenue. We do accept trucked wastewater. This is sort of a hit and miss. Sometimes we get a call or two for use of the facility to discharge some trucked wastewater. We have a permit process that's in place, so we follow that policy. As operations for expenses, still at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of changes. We do see a little bit of increase in salary and wages to reflect the union contract. Once again, our staff and myself, I really try and keep a close eye on all expenses, our chemical usage. One area that is repair and maintenance, what I found out is, well, which I've known for a while, is that the equipment, as it gets old, let's say 10 years, we got a $50,000 pump. Well, sometimes those repairs are $10,000, $15,000. So we're coming to a point where a decision needs to be made: do we replace or repair? So those are some things that that are unknown, but we do try and budget accordingly. And under administration, probably the biggest increase is salary and wages to reflect my increased time at the wastewater plant. And but everything else is typically in line from previous years. Once again, the per unit rate charged to the city is based on expenses and revenues, and that line item is reflected into the sewer budget of what the city charges, which is the same for the townships too. Any questions?
What is the 997 reserves?
The wastewater plant is required to, back in, when we took out the SRF funding for the upgrade of plant, we are required to set aside replacement funds. And we just completed a comprehensive asset registry that we identified all the equipment, and that's a good point. We increased it to $300,000. It was at $191,000. So that money goes into the wastewater reserved. So eventually, when we get to, I think the advisory board set a limit of $1 million. We will then take a close look at how much more to it if we need to additionally fund it. But that money can be used for any replacement of any major components. If there's a failure for, one of the process systems, there's money available. If we want to do a $1 million expansion, or if we need additional process, that money we can pay cash for. And we've used that in the past quite a few times when we get, let's say, a $500,000 project. Instead of bonding for it, we pay cash, and then you build up the reserves. It's a goal, I think, is what we're trying to do too, is with the rate increases for the water sewer fund, is to have reserves. So you can start paying cash for a lot of purchases. Did I answer it?
So this reserve
Is mine.
is what you're going to add to. If we have the increase, it's just going to add to this reserve. This is a reserve.
Oh.
It's a different reserve.
This reserve is a flat dollar reserve, and it is something that's required by the state, forced to do. Kind of what we've done in the past few years, the reserve actually wasn't increasing because the dollars we had set aside to increase the reserve, other things came up, and we were actually using those dollars. So the 300,000 gets us back on track to where we need to be. Like Kurt said, there was recently a review done of it, and that's where we need to be.
Where does the money come from that goes into this reserve?
This comes from, well, technically you could say 85% city, 10% Marquette Township, 5% Chocolate Township. Now this budget here feeds into the sewer budget. So this is the 590 fund. The city's portion to operate the 590 fund, if you look up at the expenses, up at the revenue, you'll see this City of Marquette. This is what we're projecting the city's contribution will be, the 2.991 million. This number will trace directly into the 592 budget, and we'll see that in a couple of minutes.
Does that come from fees, or does it come from general fund?
Yes, no, this is from sewer user fees.
City Marquette, Township, Chocolate, those monies.
That money, okay, so where does that money come from?
This money comes from the sewer user fees. So the city's contribution of 2.991 million will come from the sewer charges. And likewise, Marquette Township and Chocolate Township are charging their customers.
Does that include rate increases?
Well, this is what it takes to fund this budget. This budget works a little bit differently than the other ones. This one is expense-driven. So the way we work this one, we come up with the expenses we need, and then we plug those numbers into the formula, and it divides out how each municipality, how much their fair share is to run this operation. So this one runs a little bit differently than what you would normally see. Like I said, this one is expense-driven, which feeds into the revenue part.
Okay.
Where does the revenue come from?
The revenue comes from the sewer fund, 592, which we will get to in a few minutes.
But does the sewer fund, does the revenue you're projecting in the sewer fund, is that coming, including the rate increases we were suggesting?
When we get to the sewer fund, you'll see we haven't projected any rate increases at this time, so,
Yes, you are.
yeah. Let's get there and
It's
we
a-
can
okay.
explain it. Yeah.
Should we go to sewer next, instead of water?
No.
I'm
Let's go on
surprised you
water.
got 300,000 in a reserve at this point.
Yeah.
But that comes from a different source. You already have a way of funding that. is what
Right,
you're
it's
saying.
built into the budget,
Okay, all right.
into the wastewater budget.
But that's going to be a different reserve than
Oh, yeah,
the new reserve that you're going to start.
correct.
That
This is my money.
Well,
Me
this
and
is the
you.
wastewater treatment plant's
Plant's
money, which is owned by 3 different
Got
municipalities.
it, got it.
Because accounting-wise, maybe this would have helped explain it if I said this from the beginning. The 590 fund is really not a department of the city. It's considered a joint venture. So it's really a standalone operation from the city, and then the wastewater treatment plant contracts with the city to provide, they provide the staffing and all of that, the operations.
Got it.
So I apologize, I should have started out with
All right.
because I'm trying to explain stuff from a bean counter perspective, and I realize people don't understand that. So.
All right,
Moving along.
move to water fund. We'll leave sewer for a few minutes.
Yeah, page 207.
207. I'm going to start out with the water filtration plant. Once again, the water filtration plant has a staffing of, 4 operators, 1 supervisor, and then myself and an administrative assistant for part-time. Once again, the gallons of water treated, you tend to see it a little bit decreasing, which is the trend. But everything else, again, we're regulated by the Safe Water Drinking Act. What I've noticed in the last couple, 2-3 years is the state is requiring a lot more testing, a lot of analyticals, a lot of chemistry, a lot of special disinfectant byproducts. So I'll get into the budget a little bit. We've had to increase our laboratory services, professional contractual a little bit. Moving to, and then also on the fact sheet too, we have, Scott operates the water transmission distribution. There's some pretty cool facts there about what that department does. Do you have anything to point out?
Just a couple of things to point out quickly. The large meters, you'll notice they're just asterisks there. That's part of the JCI project where those are being replaced. That's why they show the asterisks. And then moving down there, typically we had a water meter replacement program. That's also part of the JCI project with the AMI, and that's why it's showing the asterisks there as well.
Then moving to the fee schedule on 210. That's one, I took a hard look at that this year. We do quite a bit of bacteria analysis. A lot of non-residents or residents who own camps, we do a lot of well testing. Banks are now requiring third-party sampling if you want to get a mortgage. And it does take staff quite a bit of time. We're 24/7, so that's a convenience we have. When a resident or whoever wants our service has to come in, it takes the supervisor or whoever's working there some time to explain. And we've done over 1,000 of those samples a year. It does bring in some good revenue. So I definitely, it's a good service to have, and it pays for itself. Ishpeming offers the same service at, I think, $17. However, they only have certain hours you can bring the sample in. That's why I think a lot of contractors use us. If 5 o'clock, you need to have the water main tested. They can bring the sample there. We can set it up right away. So it's a very good convenience for not only contractors, but the residents. Moving to 211, this is the operational revenue and expenses. One thing to point out, underneath the revenue, we do have the history of rate increases, and that's on all the utility budgets. So someone is asking what we've been raising the rates, so that there is a note there. I think we had some good discussion earlier about the during the rate increase discussion that talked about revenues. And then expenses, we have a couple different divisions. The main one thing, the one I'm sort of responsible for, is the water plant operation. Once again, there's a little bit of increase in salary and wages, and that reflects my time and my a little bit administrative assistant. But really, at the end of the day, most of the costs to operate a water treatment plant, these are all, everything inside the building there are pretty status quo from previous years. I don't see any major significant change on that. We do have a capital outlay equipment for turbidimeters that's required by the state of $40,000. And I could go into water transmission distribution. Pretty much it's the, again, we got pretty good history, pretty good track record. We pretty much know where the staff is. I think the level of service is excellent that the city provides. They're on call. They fix water mains. And do you have anything to add about your? Yeah.
I'll add one thing if you don't mind. You know, what I've seen with the staff and with Scott's, Kurt's in charge of the water, but Scott's in charge of the pipes and everything that gets it to you. And same thing with the sewer. But when we have a break or we have something that occurs, I mean, our crews are on scene within hours, if not minutes. You know, from time to time, you'll see a road closure as an emergency PSA or something that comes across to you. And, you know, one of the services that we're really able to provide that I think some communities can't is that when a water pipe breaks or something malfunctions, I mean, these crews are out on a moment's notice and, you know, digging in the mud and sometimes the rain and often the snow. When it's cold out and we get a freeze or something. And, you know, they do a really nice job of taking care of the citizens when we have something like that. And just out of maybe related but unrelated, I mean, we do a lot of freeze-ups in the wintertime that are not necessarily ours, but occur in the laterals that are the homeowner's responsibility. And how many of those do you think we thaw out a year? You know,
Depends on the year.
I know. Well, yeah. Well, help me out here.
It might be 2, it might be 200.
Yeah. So, but the point is that we're there within a matter of a short time, and people are rarely inconvenienced by the lack of water or sewer.
Okay. The last one for utilities is sewer. 213. One thing, I guess, people take you know, when you flush the toilet, take a shower, water goes away. And that's one thing I try and educate. I give a lot of tours to, elementary, grade school kids, high school, college, and that's one thing I really try and point out. I try and say, it is. I'll tell you, I really enjoy it. I tell you.
In a pee dance.
But anyways, where does your water go? You know, if you live in North Marquette, how does it get down to the plant? Well,
Ping pong balls.
I know, yeah. Oh, you don't see our collection yet from yesterday. Oh, did we get the stuff?
Some too, Mike.
But anyways, on the fact sheet, these are lift stations that are throughout the city. Once again, a lot of these stations are upgraded in 2004. That was probably the best projects we did. And then we've done 5 other stations last 5 years.
Kurt, would you explain what a lift station is?
Oh, yeah. Lift station is an intermediate location for wastewater to collect. There's certain elevations throughout the city. So if you live in a house in North Marquette, it has to go through a series of pipes, and it goes to it's a collection point. Like there's a little building on Holly Street in Lakeshore. That's a lift station. So wastewater goes in there, collects in a wet well. We have pumps that when it reaches a certain level, it then pumps to another lift station, eventually down to the treatment plant. I always ask a lot of people, do you know what that observation deck is right by the Coast Guard station? People don't know what it is. That's a compliment. That is a huge compliment. About 1.4 million gallons of sewage goes through that building. We got 3 200 horsepower pumps there. So it's a lift station. It's all coming from Pete's house. No.
Just half full.
Another thing too that I gotta touch on this, people don't think about us as, well, maybe a lot of people do. We run a network, our own network for water distribution, wastewater, our wastewater plant, our water plant. So we have 19 locations with network switches throughout the city. We have radio antennas, we've got PLCs. So that's all based at the wastewater plant. So we maintain that. Very fortunate to have that one operator that has a skill set that's unbelievable. Very, very fortunate that able with his knowledge and keeping that network up to par has just been fantastic. Very valuable city. So that is we can monitor it 24/7. We have alarm systems. We can do trending, that type of stuff. Anything in the sewer? Okay, sewer operations, similar to the water operations. Again, these are the guys in the trenches. These are ones that, when you get a sewer backup, are just fantastic service the city provides. And bring it home on the sewer fund. Revenues are similar to that discussion.
Page 215.
Oh, 215. Once again, these are the revenues that are projected. And
What's a non-tax customer?
that would be like public.
That's like the university.
University, prison.
Places that don't pay tax, property taxes.
So somewhere around 40% of our product is non-taxable. I'm just looking at numbers. I see 3.4, there are 3.8 and 1.4, so I'm saying maybe 30-odd%.
Yeah, it's probably closer to 30%.
Yeah, about 30%.
Isn't there some way we can fix that?
Well, we do charge them a higher rate. Non-tax customers in the sewer fund get charged a higher rate.
A
Not
higher
on the
rate
water
than-
fund, but in the sewer fund, they do.
Okay. Is it high enough?
No.
Okay.
None of our rates are high enough.
That same percentage increase applies,
Yeah.
suggesting applies to that.
I'm just selecting selective increase, I mean.
Yeah, no, all of our increases are always across the board.
We
so
can
that
change
no one-
that.
Everybody shares in the pain.
Going to expenses, basically, this has to do with the routine maintenance of the sewer system. Once again, they're pretty much, to maintain the same level of service. These are the costs that are actually are required.
One thing I wanted to point out, and that's the point I was trying to make earlier when we were talking about the 590 fund. If you look at page 216 in your budget, and probably close to halfway down, but if you look at the line that says wastewater services, 592, 561, 524, that 2.991 million is the exact same number we saw as a revenue in the wastewater treatment plant fund. So this is how I was trying to explain it. The city's portion for running the wastewater treatment plant is paid for out of the sewer fund, and that is the exact expense that's going in. So we have to have rates to not only cover that, but everything else that we're seeing in this budget. So I probably didn't redeem myself in any shape or form, but
Well,
Nicely done.
but I'm trying to explain it.
let me make a comment too. Actually, you did redeem yourself, and it should be mentioned. A couple of things also should be mentioned here. Number one, you've made a lot of Johnson Control changes and improvements in the whole operation. And number two, you are working and have been working for a long time to improve the whole structure. Are there still some wooden water mains in the city, Gary?
I don't think there's any more wooden ones, but we do have a very aged infrastructure.
There are some that are older than 100 years old.
Correct.
Yeah, and I know you're working every year to reach
In fact,
those.
we're trying to get down to an average of 100 years.
Yeah.
We're still trying to get there. So if you want to talk about history, some of these lines were probably laid in probably the Civil War era still.
Lakewood Street.
But they're not.
They're not asbestos. Got that going for you.
Be careful about talking about old things, huh?
I said they're not asbestos.
Sorry.
Old things are expensive, Paul.
Get a little punchy.
So that concludes the utility portion of the budget process.
Or did you have any questions?
Or do you have any questions?
I don't see any. Moving along.
How much does it cost to run a sewer?
Plan is working.
I think we did a pretty good job of asking questions. I'm not
Yeah.
pretty satisfied.
The questions have been great.
Not expensive to run a sewer, is it?
So next, we just have two more left. These are internal service funds, page 229, the Municipal Service Center, and this will bring Eric back in. Sorry, Eric, you had to wait a while.
Home stretch.
You can make it, Eric.
Page, like Gary said, page 229, MSC. So this is our first full year running the new service center. One thing you'll notice on the authorized positions is the custodian did retire, and we did not replace him. We contracted that service out, and we're probably saving in the ballpark of $30,000 to $40,000 by doing that. So that was a good move. We didn't have to get rid of anybody. We went through attrition, and that's been working real well for us. There's just some program statistics about the building, and a lot of it's kind of, it's such goofy moves here in the past couple of years. It's a little bit skewed, but we try to track a lot of that. Moving on to page 230. Expenditures. Probably the biggest thing to take out of this is power and gas. We underestimated utilities, going into a brand new facility. We weren't sure what to expect. We're off. So we're recovering from it for this year. But, with some of the reductions in the custodian, and then you'll see a significant reduction in operating supplies. That was some one-time purchases we had to do to finish off the building, furniture and some things like that, so. Otherwise, that's where we're at for the year. Any questions on that? All right, moving on. Fund 661, motor pool, page 231. Next page. This is this is really the crucial department, I feel, for the public works. Without machinery working, we got guys and shovels, and we're not doing a whole lot. And we got a group of 5 mechanics and a welder do a fantastic job maintaining our equipment. We've been very fortunate the past few years. You've allowed us to expand. No, I shouldn't say expand, but improve upon our existing fleet. We've had some really old equipment out there, and we've been able to make some strides, make some purchases, and that's really helped us out. But for everything else, it's still old. These guys do a fantastic job of keeping it up and keeping the fleet running. Every day there's a snowstorm, those guys are in there just at the same time as the guys plowing, making sure we're getting underbodies changed, things like that. One thing to note in the statistics is we're actually down on equipment, and that's a good thing, because if we don't have it, it doesn't cost us money. I think we're being a lot more efficient with our purchases, trying to buy pieces of equipment that are multi-use, not having equipment that's just specific to one use. So to see like a 15% reduction in our heavy duty and light duty equipment, that's a good thing. Pickup trucks and sedans and cars, those are up slightly from the year before, but as you can see to where we were in like fiscal year 2016, we're down quite a bit there. We got rid of a lot of those junkers. We've been able to replace a lot of those really old pickups that were just rusting out and making better use of it. So all good news there. And then just looking at our maintenance statistics, we're on par. Like I said, the staff does a great job. Probably the one thing that you'll see is new equipment upfitted. That's a 50% increase, but that's because we've been able to buy new stuff. So that's when just recently approved the purchase of a cab chassis for our painting operation. When they upfit that, instead of going out and buying it and having somebody give us the whole package, those guys are talented enough that we can buy the cab chassis, we can buy the truck, we can mate them together and make them work, and that saves us considerable amount of money in the long run. We're able to get 2 specific pieces of equipment that fit our needs exactly and not pay that upcharge to have somebody fit that together for us. So moving on to expenditures on the next page. Really, we're compared to last year, we're down, and that has a lot to do with capital outlay. And the notes were still left in there, but a lot of it was cut out. I like to point out, let's just kind of go through, starting at the bottom. We cut out the front end loader and the sander, the plow sander. It totaled $490K, or $590K, excuse me. That was to help us balance the budget this year, and those are expensive pieces of equipment, but we're gonna maintain what we got and push forward and do what we can to keep the fleet up. The other thing we were able to delete was one of the trucks. We want to keep the police cars up and running, so it was important to keep that at 3. But we did reduce one of the pickups to help improve our pickup fleet. And then in the 977 line item, that's, we got lawn mowers and power rakes and things like that, and we kept those in.
I gotta say, those are some really expensive rakes if you're talking 22 for buying them for the government.
What's that?
$22,000 worth of rakes. It doesn't say power
Well,
rakes.
yeah, it's a power rake.
Yeah,
It's
better be.
Yeah, it's a ride-on rake.
It's be a rake with a.
Yeah, when you got to rake the cemetery, you need heavy equipment. Otherwise, you need a lot of people.
$400,000 toilet seat.
That's true. Where you'll actually see an increase is going to be in the 775 line item, which is our repair and maintenance supplies. Last year we were at 420. It's bumped up to 490, and that's mainly attributed to 2 different items, which is the purchase of 4 underbodies we need to refurbish on the plows. They're about $10,000 a piece. And then the other interesting one is the refurbishing our 745 unit, which is our vac truck. And it's really I'd say the workhorse of the sewer department. Those things run about $500,000. For 60 grand, we can refurb the vacuum end of it and keep it running another 10 to 15 years. And we think that's probably the best bang for our buck. It's a tough pill to swallow for maintenance-wise to put into it, but we feel it's a strong piece of equipment. We're going to keep it running and stretch it out and make the most use we can. So with that, if there's any other questions on expenditures.
Seeing none.
All right.
Okay, thank you. If I could just say before we close, so this concludes today's session. The next session is Tuesday, September 11th, starting at 5:15. Should be a little bit more fun of a session. It's the one we call the Friends of Marquette. So we'll listen to the library and BDA and those kind of things and hear all the good things that they're doing. And that will be the last scheduled session, but it's not the last budget session. We'll have to schedule a public hearing and have a public hearing on the last city commission meeting of this month, this September 24th. And then, once that's adopted, we'll be bringing forward the ordinance changes for the utility rates. And that's all I have, so thank you.
That's it? Okay, we have public comment to go through yet?
Nobody left. Oh, we'll go back.
I will open public comment,
What do I say? Is it back there?
but when seeing nobody in the building, we're going to close public close public comment. Comments from the commission? Anybody? Seeing none? Comments from the city manager?
I can't help myself. I'll take the opportunity just to thank everybody tonight, and I'll again thank them on the last meeting. But while I'm thinking of it, I mean, I've been through a few of these now, and this is quite an undertaking for Gary. And I've often seen him here 8, 9 o'clock at night, just putting these things together. And I think it's really a nice job that he does, and I appreciate his effort. And sometimes I don't appreciate his surliness, when we go through this, but he takes it to heart. But one other thing, I lied to you at the last commission meeting when I said this commission meeting coming up might be busy. It's not going to be. It's going to be pretty light again. So I can tell you that, and then tell you that I'm lightening it up a little bit so that I know you'll have a meeting on Tuesday as well. So, but there's still busier commission meetings to come, and you'll have my summary tomorrow. Thank you.
We're adjourned.
System, but to complement our tablet system, very much like last year when the Honorable Mayor Tom Baldini mentioned about the e-citations, which is the ability to scan a license or punch a license into a tablet and then hit a button and print the ticket out instead of having to write it on a 3-piece carbon type copy. So moving towards that technology actually saves us money in the long run as far as having to order tickets and various things. So that was something that we had planned on implementing over a year, every other year